That's all that I wanted to tell you. ठीक है, अभी माइक ठीक है, नहीं जाने वाला है? Okay. Same course, 7 days. Those of you who missed the earlier days can make up on those days. And if you are too impatient to wait till 25th, we have this on video. We also have it on, not only this video, but we have a previous course also recorded. And we also have audio cassettes available if you want to. You can come to our library and you can even borrow it if you want.
Dr. Vaishnav is sitting next here, second. He's the librarian in charge. So, what do you mean?
Well, every Thursday also I conduct a course at the temple, but I am not very sure about the next 2 Thursdays because I may not be in town. I may be going out to give the lecture somewhere else. So I may not be able to tell you exactly whether I am here this week and next week. Coming week.
There will be program.
But there will be a program nonetheless. There will be somebody else equally competent who will be taking a class. So today's course, today's lecture is on different forms of yoga. Just see how I'll just give you an idea how far we've come for those of you who've come only for the first time today. On the first day we did, does God exist? And the importance of scripture. On the second day we did, who is God? On the third day we covered, who am I? On the fourth day we covered, why do bad things happen to good people, or the law of karma and reincarnation. Then on the fifth day we covered learning to face death. Yesterday we learned what the Bhagavad Gita says about learning to face death. And today we are going to do different forms of yoga. So once you have learned that God exists, you know who is God, you know who you are. And by understanding karma, you know how you landed in the mess that you are in. Now to find out how to get out of that mess, you should know what are the different forms of yoga that are available to you. And what does the Bhagavad Gita say about the different forms of yoga. So today's lecture is to describe different forms of yoga: Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, the topmost yoga, that is the path of perfection. So first and foremost, before I start off and tell you about different forms of yoga, I would like to tell you the meaning of the word yoga. Yoga comes from the root word which means yuj, that means to reunite. Yoga comes from the root word yuj, which means to reunite. That means that which helps you reunite to your original source, that helps to reunite the spirit soul to the supreme eternal source, that helps you reunite the Jivatma with God. That is known as yoga. The same meaning as religion. What does religion mean? Religion comes from the root word religare, the Latin root word religare. That means to reunite. Religare also means to reunite. So religion means to reunite the living entity with its original source. Yoga also means to reunite, that is to reunite the living entity with its original source. So that which helps you to reunite with God is termed as yoga. And there are many different forms of yoga. Now before we go on to different forms of yoga, first and foremost, I'd like to give you an idea about what is the goal of life. This is very, very, very important. The goal of life is bhakti. Reunion with God means to be reunited with God in transcendental loving faith. To be reunited with God in love, that is the goal of life. But sometimes people are under the illusion that to be reunited with God is not really the goal of life, but to be liberated and to become God is the goal of life. This is sometimes the illusion that people are under. So we must know what is liberation. We should understand what is moksha. Because everybody is under the impression that moksha is the goal of life. Today you just meet an average Indian and you ask him what is the goal of life, what do you want most in life? He'll say, after everything I have obtained in life, I would like to have moksha, I would like to be mukt, I would like to have mukti. So he will think that mukti is the goal of life. But mukti is not the goal of life. Mukti is just the qualification for the goal of life. In fact, you cannot be united with God in transcendental loving faith if you have not simultaneously acquired liberation. So one who has acquired love of God has also acquired liberation. But for him, liberation is just one of the byproducts on the way to acquiring love of God. Moksha or liberation is a qualification for acquiring bhakti. Try to understand this, that moksha is not the goal of life. Actually, in the Vedic scriptures, there are defined 4 main purushas. So what are these 4 main purushas? You have dharma, artha, kama and moksha. So what do we mean by these 4 purushas? What do we mean by dharma, artha, kama and moksha? First and foremost, the Vedic scriptures enjoin that you must perform dharma. Do your dharma. What do you mean by dharma? Dharma means right conduct. What do you mean by right conduct? That means regardless of what sphere of life you are placed in, regardless of what profession you are placed in, regardless of what field you are in, you should perform that work perfectly, to your best ability. If you are a doctor, be the best doctor. If you are an engineer, be the best engineer that you can be. If you are a lawyer, try to be the best lawyer that you can be, and simultaneously you fulfill your duties and obligations towards everybody. This is known as dharma. Because dharma means that which is intrinsic in you. For example, what is the dharma of fire, of wood? The dharma of wood is to burn, because fire is intrinsic in the wood. So also in each of us there is a particular dharma, which is the dharma of the body that we are in. And that dharma, to perform that dharma, is considered to be an essential step towards attaining the other things in life. So first of all, do your job well. Have right conduct. And having right conduct, do your job as perfectly as possible. So what happens? If you do your job as well as possible, if you perform in your profession as well as possible, after some time you start thinking that, well, now I'm a very good doctor, I'm a good engineer, I'm a good manager, or I'm a good lawyer, or whatever you're doing I'm very good at. Now that I'm good at what I'm doing, it's about time that I also started acquiring some money for what I was doing. I must also get some returns for what I'm doing. Not only am I behaving in a perfect way, not only am I having right conduct, not only am I doing well in my profession, but now I should get some returns for what I'm doing. That is the meaning of artha. So one first performs dharma, the right conduct. You try to be good at what you're doing. And then eventually when you're good at what you're doing, you're not satisfied. You're not satisfied with being good at what you're doing. You say, it's fine, I'm good at what I'm doing, but now I must have money. Now you must have artha. So after you perform dharma, the next stage is you aspire for artha. You want to acquire as much money as possible. Then you keep on acquiring money, more and more artha. And then finally, after acquiring a lot of money, you start scratching your head. Okay, fine, I'm good at what I'm doing, and now I'm acquiring a whole lot of money, and I'm working very hard, I'm getting a lot of money. But what's the use of all this money if I don't enjoy it? What's the use of acquiring all this artha? What's the use of acquiring all this money if I can't enjoy it in my lifetime? I can't take it with me. Therefore, I should now enjoy that wealth as much as possible. So you start off with right conduct, that is dharma. You go on to acquiring wealth, which is artha. And when you have acquired wealth, then you start thinking that what is the use of that wealth if I cannot enjoy myself? So you use that wealth to try to enjoy yourself with your material senses. That is known as kama. So you start with dharma, that is doing your job well, doing your profession well, acting with right conduct, right responsibility, performing all your duties. When that doesn't satisfy you, you want wealth. When you have acquired wealth, that doesn't satisfy you, you want to enjoy that wealth, that is kama. And finally, when you have discovered, much to your misery, that trying to enjoy yourself with your senses in this world cannot bring you happiness, when you have discovered at long last, through bitter experience, that no matter how much you are trying to enjoy yourself with your wealth, you are simply not able to enjoy yourself with your wealth because it brings you only unhappiness. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna very clearly says, he says, Vishaya Indriya Samyogad Yat Tadagre Amritopam Pariname Vishamiva Yat Sukham Rajasam Smritam. That those pleasures which are actually brought about by the union of their senses with their objects, in the beginning they taste like nectar. So when you enjoy yourself with your senses, in the beginning it's like nectar. But he says in the end it's like poison. So in the beginning when you enjoy yourself with your senses, when you try karma, it seems wonderful. But in the end, it is like poison. That is the nature of happiness of the senses. Therefore Krishna has said in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkhayono yuevate adi antavanta kaunteya natesu ramate buddha. That one who is wise, a wise man does not engage himself in pleasures of the senses because he knows they have a beginning and an end and they are the source of misery. So you start with dharma, you start with doing your job well, performing right conduct, fulfilling your responsibilities in society. That doesn't satisfy you, so you want wealth. You acquire that wealth. When you acquire that wealth, that doesn't satisfy you, so you want to enjoy that wealth. So you want to have karma. You want to enjoy with your senses. And you use that money to enjoy with your senses. When you enjoy with your senses, you discover to your bitter unhappiness that you cannot enjoy yourself with your senses because in the beginning it's like nectar, in the end it turns out to be like poison. So you say, forget it. I don't want all this stuff. These worldly things, they don't give me pleasure, they only give me pain. So now what I should be doing is that now I should try for liberation. I should try to be mukt. I should aspire for moksha. So you start with dharma, doing right duty. You acquire wealth, that is artha. Then you try to enjoy yourself in this world, that is kama. When you are frustrated in enjoyment in this world, then finally you say, I want moksha or I want mukti. But beyond dharma, artha, kama and moksha, there is what is known as a pancham purusharth. And this pancham purusharth is actually the goal of life. And this pancham purusharth which you should all strive for is love. Love of God. Of course you are all eternal. But nityo nityanam chetanas chetnanam. There is, although you are all eternal, there is a supreme eternal. Although you are all conscious, there is a supreme consciousness. Eko bahunam yo vidadati kaman. There is one person who is maintaining everybody. Tam atmastham yen upashanti dhiras. Tesham shanti shashvata netrasham. And until you learn to develop love by which you can see that person situated in the hearts of all living beings, only then you will know peace. So the goal of life is to attain love of God. And moksha is a qualification for obtaining love of God. Just like if you want to join medical college, you have to pass your 12th standard. You have to do your pre-medical studies. If you don't do well in your pre-medical, you are not given admission to medical college. So also, if you want to join engineering college, you have to qualify before you join engineering college. So also, if you want to attain bhakti, moksha or mukti is simply one of the qualifications for attaining bhakti. It is not the end. Mukti is not the end. Mukti is the beginning of love of God. You begin to have genuine love of God only when you have mukti. So bhakti is obtained by those who have mukti. And if you have not attained bhakti, although you have acquired mukti, you lose that liberation. This is the uniqueness of the process. That if you should somehow or the other reach that position where you are liberated and you don't progress, you fall down. Because all forms of yoga except bhakti yoga take you up to moksha. Karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, all of them are actually meant to take you to bhakti. But if you do not use them to take you to bhakti and you stop short at moksha, you will fall down. This is the opinion of the Bhagavad Gita. This is the opinion of the Bhagavatam. This is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where actually you see Brahma speaking to the Lord. He says, Ye anya aravindaksha vimukta maninas tvai ashtabhava dav vishuddha buddhaya aruya krichrena param padatata patanti adho anadritam yusmadangraya. He says, O lotus-eyed Lord, there are some who with great austerities and difficulty of performing spiritual practices, they eventually obtain the param padam, that is, they obtain moksha. But because their minds are polluted and they do not take shelter of your lotus feet in love and devotion, what happens to them? They fall down from that path. Therefore, an atheist may also obtain moksha. A man who thinks that he is God may also obtain moksha, but he cannot maintain that position because he is not taking the shelter of God. Because he does not attain bhakti, he comes down again. So it's very important at the outset for me to make clear to you that the goal of life is bhakti. And all yoga should eventually lead to bhakti. But on the path to bhakti, moksha is just one of the stages. It is one of the qualifications for finally attaining bhakti. Can you have the next slide? Now, first and foremost, I would like to cover the first form of yoga, which is known as Karma Yoga. Now, please understand Karma Yoga very well, because very few people have understood Karma Yoga. What you may say? Few people have understood Karma Yoga. I have understood Karma Yoga. Everybody I know has understood Karma Yoga. In actual fact, every Indian imagines that he is a Karma Yogi. You meet any Indian on the street and you ask him, he'll say, oh, Karma Yoga. I have been doing Karma Yoga all my life. I have been doing Karma Yoga all my life. But if India is such a wonderful nation of Karma Yogis, why are we in the mess that we are in? It's because nobody has understood Karma Yoga. So try to understand what is Karma Yoga. But before we understand what is Karma Yoga, we must understand what precedes Karma Yoga. We must understand what is Karma Kand. We should also understand what is Karma Mimamsa. Karma Mimamsa is one school of philosophy. Karma Kand is another school of philosophy, also contained in Vedic literature. And finally you have Karma Yoga, which is actually mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita and recommended by Lord Krishna. So, what is the Karma Mimamsa? Today when you meet somebody and you ask them that, will you join me for a lecture? Will you join me coming to the temple? Oh, you are a bhakti yogi. That means you're a little loose here to take to the path of devotion. I am a karma yogi. I am working very hard. You just go and do your thing. I'll just keep doing mine. There's no need to worship God. I've been working very hard all my life. And since I am working, work is worship, they will tell you. That work is worship, and since I am working all the time, that is my worship. I don't need to come and see God. I don't need God. I am just working all the time, and since work is worship, I have no need of God. I just do my work and that's it. That is Karma Yoga. That is nonsense. It's not Karma Yoga. That is known as Karma Mimamsa philosophy. Karma Mimamsa philosophy states that you don't need to worship God. What do you need a God for anyway? You just have to perform your work. And if you perform your work, you are going to get your result. This is what Karma Mimamsa philosophy propounds. It says there is no need of God in the universe. There is no need for you to approach anybody whom you call God. No need to perform worship, no need to perform sacrifice. There is no need to even think of God. You just do your work and do it perfectly. And if you do your work perfectly, nobody can stop you from getting the fruit of that work. The result has to come. You work very hard and that result must come to you. You don't need to ask anybody or pray to anybody. After all, even if you pray to somebody, don't you have to work? It's just a trick that they're playing on you. That you work hard and then pray to somebody. When you get something, you think, oh, that's been given by God. Actually, it's been got by your own work. So you don't need to worship God. Simply do your work. And if you do your work, the fruit will come to you. The result will come to you automatically. This is Karma Mimamsa philosophy. And this is what people foolishly imagine to be Karma Yoga. This is not Karma Yoga by any stretch of imagination. Even if you take hallucinatory drugs and read the Bhagavad Gita, you will quickly realize this is not what Krishna is saying. Krishna is not saying this. In fact, he is arguing against Karma Mimamsa philosophy. Karma Mimamsa philosophy says there is no need of God. You simply work, you will get the result. But common sense must tell you that's not true. Because so many times we do our work and we don't get the result. You work hard in your profession or in your job or at a particular piece of work, and although you put body and soul in that work that you've done, you don't get the fruit. As a doctor, I can tell you that many times the same treatment is given to two patients with the same disease. There is no difference between the two patients. Both of them, you are giving them the same treatment. But one patient recovers and the other patient does not recover. So if Karma Mimamsa says that all you have to do is to do your work and the result will automatically come to you, then why is it that when you perform this work, sometimes you get the result, sometimes you don't get the result. No matter if you are doing that work perfectly each time, you don't get the same result every time. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not successful. So obviously, the fruit is not dependent only on your work. There is some other factor which is responsible for seeing that the result of your work comes to you. There's some other factor which determines whether your work is successful or not. So this is karma mimamsa philosophy, which tries to argue that you only work and automatically you'll get the result. But a progression from karma mimamsa philosophy is called the karma kanda philosophy. Karma kanda philosophy says very clearly that it's not sufficient to simply work and imagine that you'll get the fruit, because it doesn't always work out like that. You do your job and so many times, no matter how well you've done it, you don't get result, because there is a controller. And that controller who watches over what you're doing, he finally sanctions or decides whether you should be given the fruit of your work or not. And when you appease that controller by means of sacrifice, by performing a ceremony to remember him and propitiate him, only then will he see that the result of your work will be made available to you. So it is not sufficient to only work. Of course you have to work. Nobody can stop working. You cannot even maintain your body if you do not work. This is what Krishna says. But you not only work into working, you also perform a sacrifice or a ceremony to propitiate the Creator who will see to it that the fruits will be made available to you. This is the philosophy of Kanda. That not only duty but also perform sacrifice along with your duty. So this is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. It's also mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, he says, Annat bhavanti bhutani parjanyo anna sambhava yagnat bhavati parjanyo yagna karma samudbhava. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, according to this karma kand philosophy, everybody is maintained by grain. You're alive today because of grain, because grain that springs forth from the earth nourishes your body. That's why you're alive. So he says, Annat bhavanti bhutani. Actually, by eating this grain, all living entities maintain their bodies. Then he says, Parjanyo anna sambhava. Because of rainfall that comes from the heavens, because rain falls from heaven, eventually those grains grow. If there's no rain, there is no grain. So you must have rainfall, because without rainfall, you cannot have that grain growing. And he says, Yagnat bhavati parjanyo. It's when you perform sacrifice to propitiate the controller who's in charge of the rain, and then only get that rain. So you have to perform sacrifice. That sacrifice appeases or propitiates that controller who's in charge of rainfall, and that controller gives you that rainfall, and that rainfall produces that grain which you eat and maintain your body. And yet he says, Yagna karma samudbhava. He says it's not enough to perform sacrifice, you must also work. And how must you work? It is mentioned further ahead. That karma brahmodbhavam viddhi. That this karma, what activities you have to perform, they mention in the scriptures. So first you have to perform your work as mentioned in the scripture. Then you have to perform sacrifice. And by the performance of your work and by the performance of sacrifice, by which you propitiate the controller, you get rainfall. This rainfall brings forth grain from the earth. That grain nourishes you. So in this way, by nourishing the controller nourishes you. That the demigods are actually nourished by the sacrifice that you perform. And the demigods in turn nourish you by giving you rainfall, which gives you grain, which in turn is responsible for maintaining you. So this is karma kanda philosophy. So karma mimamsa says there's no need to pray to anybody, no need for sacrifice. All you have to do is work hard and the results will come automatically. Then you have karma kanda philosophy, which says that yes, do your work, no doubt. But in spite of doing your work, you may not be successful. Therefore, you propitiate the controller in charge of that particular department by performance of sacrifice. And being appeased and propitiated, he will now reward you. So this is karma kanda philosophy. But Krishna's philosophy of karma yoga transcends both these philosophies completely. Krishna has never said that keep on working and the result will come to you anyway. Neither has Krishna said that you work and after you work you perform that sacrifice by which you will propitiate the demigods. That's not what Krishna says. Krishna gives you a completely different perspective on work. He says that that work that you are doing itself can help to reunite you with your Creator. That very work that you're doing work for the sake of maintaining this body. But Krishna says you need not do that. He says that very work that you're doing can be used as an instrument to reunite you with God. That work that you're doing can reunite you with God. How? Because Krishna says, he says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter, Yagnarthart karmanon yatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sanga samachara. He says all activity that you do must itself be a sacrifice. It's not that you perform your work thinking of your fruit that you're going to get, and after you finish your work you do a havan to remember God. Krishna says that the very work that you're doing, that very activity that you're performing should be performed in such a manner that you're reminded of God. That every action that you're performing must help you remember God. That means that work must be itself a sacrifice. There is no differentiation between work and sacrifice as in karma kand. This work that you're performing is itself a sacrifice which helps you to remember God. So this is the difference between the 3 forms of philosophy. Karma Mimamsa says there is no need to remember God. Just keep on working and the results will come to you. Karma Kand says no. If you keep on working like that, you don't always get the fruit. So what you do is, you work hard, and after working hard, you perform a ceremony or a sacrifice or a havan by which you propitiate the controller, and then you will get the fruit. And Krishna says that that very activity that you are performing, should not be performed for the sake of acquiring fruit, but it should be performed for the sake of helping you to reunite with God. That is the difference between what Krishna says, what Karma Kanda says, and what Karma Mimamsa says. Now what is the meaning of sacrifice? Sacrifice means using your senses, using your working senses in such a manner that you remember God. Using your working senses in a manner so as to remember God is termed as sacrifice. And when you do your work in such a manner that you remember God at all times, that is sacrifice. Therefore Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Chetasa sarva karmani mai sanyasya matpara buddhi yogam upashrita matchitta satatam bhava matchitta sarva durgani mat prasada tarishyasi atho chetvam ahankaran nasroshasi vinangshasi. He says, always think of me when you are working. Be completely absorbed in me when you are working. Unite your intelligence with me when you are working, and take shelter of me when you are working. Then he says, in this way, by depending on me in all your activities, if you depend on me in all your activities, you will cross over all the obstacles in life by my grace. If you think of me constantly in all your activities, you will cross over all the obstacles in life by my grace. But if you think that you are doing it, you are finished. Atho chetvam ahankaran nasroshasi vinangshasi. If you think you are doing it, you are finished. But you understand that you are doing nothing. That I am doing everything for you because you are depending on me, because you are surrendering to me, because you are taking shelter of me, because you are depending on me in the work that you are doing. Therefore, you will cross over all obstacles because I will help you cross over all the obstacles. But if you think that you are crossing over the obstacles, if you think that you are doing anything, then you will be completely finished. Nashroshasi vinangshasi. So the idea of Karma Yoga means learning to work so that you are remembering God at all times, learning to depend on God in your work at all times, so that by constantly remembering God, by constantly thinking of God, you will depend on Him completely and you will acquire love of God. So Karma Yoga means helping you to work as a sacrifice so that you develop love of God. So work should be done to help you develop bhakti. So Karma Yoga is that work that is performed so that you develop bhakti. As Krishna says, never imagine that you are doing it. Always understand that I am doing it. Because the illusion is constantly there that I am doing this, I am doing this. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. That the bewildered living entity, he imagines himself the doer of activities which are performed by material nature herself. That material nature is performing those activities under the directions of God, and you, foolish creature, are imagining that you are doing it. You might have seen the slide I showed you earlier. That the baby kangaroo, the joy, is seated in the pouch of the mother kangaroo. And the mother kangaroo is jumping and doing everything. But that foolish baby kangaroo, that joy, he thinks he's doing everything. He thinks he's jumping very high. He thinks he's running very fast. That is the same position with all of us. Actually, God does all work by directing material nature, and we foolish living entities, we imagine that we are doing it. So Krishna says, don't do that. He says, learn to depend on me at all times. Now another very important point is that when you are learning to depend on Krishna at all times, what do you do when you get the fruit? Sometimes foolish people who have misunderstood, misconstrued and tortured the text of the Bhagavad Gita go on to tell you that karma yoga means only this, that simply work without thinking of the fruits. When you are working, don't think of the fruits. But when the fruits come, you enjoy them. This is the philosophy that some people teach you. That karma yoga means that when you are working, think only of your work, don't think about the fruits. The fruits are going to come anyway. And when the fruits come, you enjoy that fruit. But that's not true. In fact, actually, this is a very famous one in the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, you wake up any Indian in his sleep and he'll be able to give you this verse. It's also quoted in the Mahabharata. It is said, Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala hetur bur mate sangosva akarmani. That you have no right to the fruit. He doesn't say don't think about the fruit, but when you get the fruit, enjoy it. He says you have no right to the fruit, you have only right to perform your duty. This is very important. Because what happens, you find people who claim to be karma yogis, whole year they are working like donkeys, really very hard. They don't enjoy themselves 1 minute. But at the end of the year, when everything is added up and they see what they've earned, then they say, come on, let's enjoy. Then they're off. They're off for a tour of Europe or Switzerland or Hong Kong or maybe Bangkok. And they enjoy themselves and come back and say, I am karma yogi, whole year I worked very hard. But then what are you doing? You're also enjoying the fruit. Krishna says you have a right to perform your work because that work helps to reunite you with God. But you have no right to the fruit. That fruit is not your property. That fruit should be used in the service of God. You yourself must live an austere lifestyle. It doesn't matter if you are earning hundreds of crores of rupees. It doesn't matter at all. Those hundreds and crores of rupees must be used in the service of God. You yourself, you are entitled to do your work, no doubt, but you must live austerely. You must not use that for your own benefit, for enjoying yourself, because that will trap you further in karmic reaction. Therefore, it has been mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, Anashrita karma phalam karya karma karotu ya sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragnirna chakriya. That one who works hard as he is obligated. You have your obligations to your business, to your job, to your profession. So one who works hard as he is obligated without taking shelter of the fruits of his labor. That means it doesn't matter what you're getting as fruit for your work. You don't take shelter of it. You live austerely. You minimize your standard of living so that you are just living, so that you are on the limit of tolerance of your comfort level is just your level of tolerance. You're not trying to enjoy yourself. Then such a person is considered to be a sannyasi. He is the true yogi. That is the definition of sannyasi. One who works hard and does not take shelter of his fruits. He is a real yogi. He is a real sannyasi. Not one who lights no fire and does no work. One who lights no fire and does no work, he is not the sannyasi. It is the person who is working hard all the time, but in spite of the fact that he is working hard, he is living austerely and is using the fruits of his labor in the service of God. That is the definition of sannyasi. So Krishna says, just remember these points in Karma Yoga. That Karma Yoga is performed to remember God throughout every activity that you do in your work. That the work you are doing itself is an instrument to help you reunite with God. Krishna says very clearly, and it's also mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that dharmasya hi apavargasya nartho arthayopakalpate narthasya dharmaikantasya Kamo labhaya smrita. It is said that your profession itself is the instrument for your liberation. Don't give up your profession. Your profession itself is the instrument for your liberation. Dharmasya hi apavargasya. Whatever you are doing in life, that has been given to you by God for the sake of liberating you. That profession or your job or your field is not meant for earning money. Dharmasya hi apavargasya nartho arthayopakalpate. It is not meant for earning money. Narthasya dharma ekantasya kamo labhaya smrita. And whatever you earn from your profession, it is not meant to be used to enjoy with your senses, because that will trap you further. That your profession or your field or your job is your instrument for liberation. It is not meant for earning money. And in fact, whatever benefit or fruit that you get from your job, if you use it to enjoy yourself, what will happen is that you will trap yourself in material nature. So instead, it should be used in the service of God. This is very important. Whatever you do it by constantly thinking of God, constantly depending on God, understanding that God is doing everything, you are doing nothing. In this way, you will be successful because you will cross over all obstacles of life by His grace. And very important, don't think that you are doing it. And when you get the fruit, don't try to enjoy the fruit to the utmost. That fruit must be used in the service of God, and you yourself must live an austere lifestyle. This is also an important point. And furthermore, he says, do not be attached to inaction. Don't think that by giving up your activity you will be liberated. You cannot do that. You have to work, because that work has been given to you by God for liberating you. It's been given to you by God as a gift. Your work, your job, your profession is a gift given to you by God. And that gift is given to you by God as an instrument to help you develop love of Him. So how foolish if you cast it away. How foolish if you throw it away. In fact, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that one who works as he is obligated, but he is unattached to everything around him, asakta buddhi sarvatra, jitatma vigata spriya, naishkarmyam paramam siddhim sannyasena adhigacchati. That one who works all the time as he is obligated, but he is unattached to everything around him, that person, although he is appearing to be working, he is actually reached the perfection of renunciation. Just imagine, he is working as he is obligated, but he is unattached to everything around him. Therefore, he has reached the perfection of renunciation. He has actually attained sannyas. So don't be misled by people who tell you that working like a donkey means that you are karma yogi. Working like a donkey does not mean that you are karma yogi. What is the proof? How do you differentiate between a donkey and a karma yogi? Tomorrow you meet your neighbor or your friend or your relative who tells you that no, I am a karma yogi. So how will you check? What's the check to find out whether he is a real karma yogi or not? Find out whether he is anxious to hear about God. Because in the Srimad Bhagavatam this test has been given. In the Srimad Bhagavatam it has been said, Dharma svanushtita pumsam vishwaksena kathasuya na utpadyed yadiratim shrama evahi kevalam. That what is the proof that whether you are a karma yogi or not? If you are genuinely a karma yogi, if you are genuinely working as a karma yogi to develop love of God, then what happens? Then you become anxious to hear about God. You become anxious to hear about God. So if the work that you are doing does not make you anxious to hear about God, then the work that you are doing is hard labor. Shrama evahi kevalam. You can check it out for yourself in your own life. If by doing your job you do not become more anxious to hear about God, then the work that you are doing is hard labor. Shrama evahi kevalam. That is actually donkey's labor. Because if you are working for God, if you are remembering God, if you are depending on God, if you are thinking of God throughout your job, throughout your work, then when you are free from your work, you are anxious to hear more about God whom you have been thinking about all day. It's just like a married couple, shall I say newly married couple, because after you are married for some time, then the whole thing changes. So a newly married couple, the husband goes to work, but all the time he is working, he is thinking about his new bride who is at home. His young wife who is just married, to whom he is just married, he is thinking of her all the time because he is working for her. Whatever he is doing at his job, he is doing it to maintain his wife. So he is constantly thinking of his wife when he is working. And now what happens? When it's 6 o'clock, when it's time to leave the office, he has to rush. He's not going to say that, no, I'm not very interested in going home, I'll sit here in my office. No, he wants to rush home and meet his wife. Why? Because throughout the day he has been working for his wife. Therefore, when he gets the slightest opportunity, he runs to meet his wife. So also one who's a karma yogi, one who's been working for God, he works throughout the day remembering God. And at the slightest opportunity he gets, he runs to remember God. He runs to a place where he can hear about God. He runs to a place where he can talk about God. He runs to a place where he can sing about God. That is the test of whether you are a karma yogi or not. Because after all, many people claim to love God. The number of people who, if you walk down Churchgate Station and throw a stone, you are bound to hit a person who tells you that I love God. But what is the test of whether somebody loves God or not? The test is, what is he doing to demonstrate his love for God? If a man says that he loves his wife, but he never visits his wife, he never talks to his wife, he never talks about his wife, he never gives his wife anything, he never thinks about his wife. In fact, he is not anxious to go and meet his wife. How can you imagine that he loves his wife? If he loves his wife, he will be thinking about his wife, he will be talking to his wife. Again, I am talking about a newly married couple. Please get me clear. And he is always anxious to go and meet her. This is the nature of love. So also one who loves God, of course that is mundane love. And this is actually transcendental pure love. In love of God, you are very anxious to hear about God. You may be doing your work, but the minute you put your pen down, when the bell rings, when you have to leave your office, immediately the thought comes, how can I best hear about God now that my work is over? Because throughout the day I've been constantly thinking about God. Now I want to hear about God. I want to talk about God. I want to do so many things for God. I want to serve God directly. This is the test of a karma yogi. So eventually, karma yoga means working so that you develop love of God. Working so that you develop love of God is termed as karma yoga. So therefore, karma yoga leads to what? Karma yoga leads to bhakti. If karma yoga doesn't lead to bhakti, what is it? It is shrama eva hi kevalam. It is hard labor. It is donkey's work if it doesn't lead to love of God. Right. So now we have what is termed as Jnana Yoga. You must know what is Jnani, you must know what is Jnana Yoga, and you must know what is the real meaning of Jnana. This is also very, very important. Now, this is very important because people often imagine, deluded people who have been misled on the path, have under the impression that Jnana is the highest path to God. In actual fact, Jnana is the very lowest. Jnana, the approach to God through knowledge, is the very lowest. And when you realize that, you will understand that Jnana Yoga is not all that is painted out to be. Actually, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you return to the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says very, very clearly. He says, fix your mind on me at all times. Fix your mind on me at all times. This is what he says. Then he says, if you can't fix your mind on me at all times, then he says, engage in Abhyas Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, because by performing Bhakti Yoga or Abhyas Yoga, you will soon be able to fix your mind on me. That is, if you chant my name, if you get up in the morning, if you visit the temple, if you congregationally sing the glories of Lord, if you hear Katha about the Lord, this is the path of Abhyas Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. In this way, he says, very shortly you will develop a desire and ability to fix your mind on me at all times. So if you can't fix your mind on me at all times, number 2 is you perform Bhakti Yoga. That means if you don't have Bhakti already, you perform Bhakti Yoga. There's a difference between Bhakti and Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti is the goal of life and Bhakti Yoga is the means to attain that. So he says, if you don't have Bhakti immediately, perform Bhakti Yoga, you will attain that ability to have love for me and fix your mind on me at all times. He says, if you can't do that, if you can't perform Bhakti Yoga, because the regulations are too difficult for you, he says, then at least you try to work for me. You at least try to work for me. You work for me in such a manner that you can think about me. That means, If you cannot directly follow the regulative principles, chant the holy name of God, if you cannot perform the 9 processes of devotional service I will explain to you later, then at least you work for God. You help other people to remember God even if you cannot follow the principles. You can help them in so many ways, in your profession, in your work. In all ways you can help other people to remember God even if you cannot follow the principles strictly. This is known as working for God. He says if you cannot work for God because you're not even attracted to working for God, what to speak of following regulative principles, then he says you work hard but give up the fruits of your labor. That means you work as you're obligated, but the fruits of your labor, you give it to charity. Give it to a good, benevolent organization which uses that money for some good, for benefit to other people. So you work hard, but that fruit you give to somebody else. That is third best. First best is, of course, best of all is acquiring bhakti, fixing your mind on God at all times. If you can't do that, second best, Krishna says, is to have bhakti yoga, because that helps you to develop bhakti. If he says you can't do that, you work for God directly. If you can't work directly for God, he says, doesn't matter, you work as however you want, but that fruit, you give it away for a good cause. If you can't do that, what does Krishna say? If you can't even give up the fruits of your labor, then he says, in such a case, then you may pursue knowledge. If you can't even do that, if you are not even capable of doing that, then he says you pursue knowledge. But better than the pursuit of knowledge is meditation. Better than meditation is giving up the fruits of your labor. Better than giving up the fruits of your labor is working for me. Better than working for me is following the principles of Bhakti Yoga. Because it is by following the principles of Bhakti Yoga that you can fix your mind on me. So actually, if you see that ladder which is described in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Jnana, the pursuit of knowledge, comes very low down on the list, bottom of the line. But unfortunately, as I said, Ajnani is one who considers himself to be very learned. These people are very intellectual. They always talk about how intelligent they are and how dumb other people are. And I am very intelligent, you see. I am following Jnana Yoga. You people, simple, emotional, sentimental, weak-minded people, you can follow bhakti. Or if you are neither intellectual nor you're emotional, you work like a donkey, doesn't matter, you will achieve God. This is the opinion that they have. So these are called jnanis. It's very difficult for them to attain yoga, or very difficult for them to attain jnana yoga, because they are so puffed up by their own intelligence. They are so puffed up by their own intellect. They feel that by reading the scriptures, by acquiring knowledge, they are actually superior to other people. So it's very difficult to cross beyond that stage. For that you require the mercy of a spiritual master. So the jnani actually is puffed up by his own intelligence. Therefore he finds it very difficult to approach God. Because what is the qualification for obtaining God? Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the qualification for obtaining God begins with amanitvam adambitvam. That first of all you have to lose all pride, you have to lose all arrogance. You have to develop humility. Because when you lose pride, when you lose arrogance, when you develop humility, then you can approach God. If you think that you're a big jnani, if you think that you are very spiritually elevated, if you think you are above everybody else, that means you're at the bottom of the dunghill. You are absolutely at the pits, you are in the bottom. If you think you're on the top, that means you're at the bottom. If you think you're the most elevated devotee, if you think you're more elevated than other people, that means actually you are the most degraded of all. Because spiritual life means acquiring humility. So, amanitvam adambitvam, you should understand that first of all, you should have no pride, you should have no arrogance. So when you have that humility, then only you can approach God. Therefore, the path of Jnana is very difficult. But if you take to the path of Jnana, eventually after many, many lifetimes, you will eventually come to the same conclusion. What is that? You will come to the conclusion that Krishna is the source of everything. Because what does the Jnani think? The Jnani thinks that God is impersonal. Jnani looks upon God as an impersonal Brahman. And although he looks upon God as an impersonal Brahman, he imagines in a short time that he has become God. These are actually pitfalls in the path of religion. So you should understand that you are not God, you cannot become God, you are simply an infinitesimal part of God. And actually your intelligence, your intellect, your great position is a handicap for acquiring God. In fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam it has been said that Janma Aishwarya Shruta Shribir Edhamana Madapuman Naiv Arati Abhidhatum Vai Tvam Akinchana Gocharam. What do you have? Do you have aristocratic birth, Janma? Are you born in an aristocratic family? Aishwarya, do you have wealth? Shruta, are you considered very learned and intellectual? Shribir, are you very attractive to the opposite sex? Are you beautiful or handsome? If you have any one of these qualities or a combination of these qualities, then you are disqualified from attaining God. You are disqualified from attaining God. These are all handicaps on the path of God realization, because God is the property of those who are materially exhausted. So when one is materially exhausted, only then you can approach God. So imagining yourself to be learned, imagining yourself to be very intelligent, imagining yourself to be intellectual are all handicaps on the path to attaining God. So one should acquire the virtue of humility, because when you acquire the virtue of humility, then you can progress on the path. And in fact, if you become humble while following the path of knowledge, eventually you will come to the conclusion that Krishna is the source of everything. Because in the beginning, it will be very rough going for you on the path of knowledge. It has been said that klesho diktaras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham dehavad bir avapyate. For one who is attached to the worship of God in the impersonal manifestation, such a person will have great difficulty. It will be very painful for him to progress in that form of worship, because he himself is embodied. But eventually it has been said that bahunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvam iti sa mahatma sudurlabha. That eventually after many lifetimes of pursuing knowledge, you will eventually come to that conclusion that actually Krishna, Vasudev, is the source of all that exists. So once again we come to the same conclusion, that you start out on a path of yoga which leads to what conclusion? That Krishna is God and the goal of life is to attain love of Him. Because Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, He says, what is knowledge? He says, sarvasya chaham hridi sanvishto matasmritir jnanam apahanam cha vedaischa sarver aham eva vedyo vedanta krit veda vedeva chaham. He says, I am seated in everybody's heart, and from me comes knowledge, remembrance and forgetfulness. Because I am in fact the writer of the Vedas, I am the compiler of the Vedas, I am the goal of the Vedas. And the goal of all Vedic scriptures is to eventually realize me. And he also says that yo mam evam asamudo janati purushottamam sa sarvavid bhajati mam sarva bhavena bharata. That one who understands me, Krishna, to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is understood to know everything. Sa sarvavid, he is supposed to be knower of everything because he knows who is God. If you know everything and don't know who is God, you don't know anything. But if you know who is God, then you know everything, because God contains everything within Him. So, in actual fact, a jnani has very rough going, because first of all he is handicapped by the fact that he thinks himself to be very intelligent. Some of you might be wondering, why is he being so harsh on jnanis? Why is he going so tough on all the jnanis? Because a jnani has got rough going. How do I know? Because I was on that path. I can tell you with conviction that it's a rough going. I can tell you with conviction that it's a path with many pitfalls. I can tell you with conviction that it's a path where you get very puffed up and very proud. Why? Because I was on that path. And because I was on that path, and because I have seen the disadvantages of that path, of getting puffed up, of being proud of your intelligence or intellectualism, of having great difficulty in worshipping the impersonal absolute, I have gone through all this, therefore I can tell you, therefore I am speaking so strongly against jnanis. In fact, it has been said that only by the mercy of a spiritual master can your eyes be opened. Therefore, although I was struggling on a path, my eyes were opened by my spiritual master. It has been said, Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yene Tasmai Shri Guruven Nama. That I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master has opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. So although I was on that path, by the mercy of my spiritual master, my eyes were opened and I realized what is the path of devotion. The simpler path, the better path, the smoother path, the path recommended by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. So therefore I am speaking strongly about this because I don't want any of you to be misled. I don't want you to make the same mistakes I have made. Because an intelligent man, he learns by hearing. A less intelligent man, he learns by seeing. The least intelligent man, he learns by experiencing. So since I am the least intelligent and I have learned by experiencing, I want you to be most intelligent and learn by hearing. So the purpose of all knowledge is to understand that Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead, and when you understand that Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead, you are understood to know everything. Because the Jnani, after many lifetimes, eventually comes to that conclusion that Vasudeva Sarvamiti, that Vasudeva, that is son of Vasudeva, Krishna, he is the source of everything, and by developing love of him, you can actually attain the goal of life. Because actually, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Naham Veder na tapasa, na jnanena na cha ijjaya. He says, you cannot attain me by studying the scriptures. Naham Veder. Don't think that by reading scriptures you can attain God. Naham Veder. No tapasa, not by performing austerities you can understand God. No danena, not by giving charity you can understand God. No cha ijjaya, not by performing rituals you can remember God or attain God. He says, bhaktyatva ananya shakya. It's only by developing love that you can understand me. This is the statement in the Bhagavad Gita. So knowledge must also in turn lead to the knowledge of who is God, and when you learn who is God, then you will develop love for him. So eventually knowledge also leads to bhakti. Can we have the next slide? Now we come to the path of Ashtanga Yoga. Now the path of Ashtanga Yoga is known as the eightfold path of Dhyana Yoga. Now we have some people who talk about Hatha Yoga, and we have people who talk about Raja Yoga. Well, suffice to know that Raj Yoga as well as Hatha Yoga are included in this path of Ashtanga Yoga. This path has been well described by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. And actually he has described an eightfold path by which you can gradually come to Samadhi. Can you have the next slide? And this process of yoga has been described in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So you have the eightfold path, and in this eightfold path, it's a stage-wise, step-wise progression. That you have restraints and you have observances. These are known as yama and niyama. So in yama and niyama, what do you have? First of all, you have to practice 100%, to also have other qualities like ashteya. You should not be in the least bit having even the slightest inclination towards stealing, or even the slightest inclination towards covetousness, or the slightest inclination towards hoarding things. You should also have you should be convinced, and you should be a person who is 100% truthful. You should have satya. You should be shaucham. You should also be 100% pure, not only externally but also internally. You should be santosha. You should be completely content no matter what is performed on you in life. You should be able to endure everything in life. And if you have followed all these strict restraints, if you have followed all these strict observances, then finally you can come to the third level, which is called asana. Asana is not gymnastics. Asana is actually performing exercises which have been designed by God for preparing your body for meditation. That means your body by itself cannot sit down and meditate. Therefore, you have to learn to actually condition your body so that it becomes fit for meditation. Of course, nowadays yoga has become very popular, and people are performing yogic exercises for what purpose? To improve their sex life, to become sexual gymnasts. But that is not the purpose of yoga. In fact, before you perform asana, you have to be celibate for a good period of time. So, of course, people today are defeating the actual purpose of asana. It's one who has been celibate for a long period of time who can perform asana properly, and who is qualified to perform asana. So asana is performing yogic exercises for the sake of conditioning and developing the body to make it fit to meditate. And now, after following all these practices of yama and niyama, when you come to asana, you have to perform all these exercises. And how many exercises are there which you have to perfect? There are 84 lakh exercises that you have to perfect. 84 lakh asanas which you have to master and perfect. And after you have mastered 84 lakh asanas and perfected them, then you can progress to the fourth stage, if you have lived long enough, or if you carried it on from the previous lifetime to this lifetime. So then you have to do pranayam. In pranayam you cannot perform unless you have mastered asana, because then actually pranayam is supposed to be a dangerous thing. Because if you try to perform pranayam without having performed asana, and if you perform it improperly, you can actually damage yourself. Just like you can damage yourself performing asana if you have not performed yama and niyama properly. And in pranayam you learn to control your ingrowing breath and your outgoing breath. That you learn to control your breathing as it goes in, as it comes out. Then you should also know to perform kumbhaka. That means you should know how to retain your breath inside, and you should also see that your breath is restrained outside and prevented from entering into your chest. That means you should be able to stop your respiration with air inside your chest and stop your respiration with air outside your chest. And eventually what do? Eventually in pranayam, you come to that stage where you come to a stage where there is keval kumbhaka. Automatically, without any specific endeavor, you should be able to stop breathing completely and remain in trance. That means you should learn to be able to stop your breathing completely. That's why you have yogis who can actually be buried underground for 8 days, 10 days without any oxygen, without any air, and they're able to put themselves into a trance. Why? Because they have mastered pranayam. So after you have mastered pranayam, that means you've been able to stop breathing altogether. When you've been able to give up the process of breathing, then you can go on to the next. And that is pratyahara. Pratyahara means that you should be able to now withdraw your senses within yourself. You should now, just like a tortoise withdraws his limbs from all sides within the shell, so also you should be able to withdraw your senses within you. And after you perform that, you come to dharana, where you're able to focus all your energy, able to focus and concentrate all your energy on remembering God. Then you can come to dhyan, which is meditation. And by the process of meditation, by fixing your eyes on a single point, in fact it has been said by yogis that God is situated at the tip of your nose. If you can focus your eyes and your mind on the tip of your nose and remain in that concentration, eventually you will discover the Paramatma or the Lord in the heart. You will attain Samadhi. So let us see the process once again. Can we have the slides again? That you have to practice strict celibacy. You have to strictly practice the principles which include non-stealing, non-hoarding. You have to be 100% truthful even if it is to your disadvantage. You also have to learn to be 100% pure, completely content no matter what happens to you. And when you have mastered yama and niyama, you have to master 84 lakh asanas. And after you have mastered 84 lakh asanas and prepared your body for meditation, then you can go on to pranayam, where you can control your breathing to the extent that you can stop breathing altogether. And when you have been successful in stopping your breathing altogether, then you can go on to the next stages. That is, you can go on to pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and finally you attain samadhi. In fact, when Arjuna hears the process of yoga as described by Krishna to Arjuna, Arjuna put his hands up. He says, I give up. This method is not for me. So don't feel too bad if you feel this method is not for you either. Because it is a method which was not even possible for Arjuna to do. You think Arjuna was an ordinary person? Arjuna was not an ordinary person. He was the absolute flower of Indian manhood. He was the most wonderful human being living in India at that time. He was a prince. He was the son of Indra. Indra is the king of the demigods, and Arjuna was the son of Indra. He was in fact a direct friend of Lord Krishna. So you can understand what a wonderful person Arjuna was. He was a prince. He was educated by wonderful gurus like Dronacharya and by so many other wonderful sages. He was tutored by them. And after being tutored like this young prince, who is the epitome of shining Indian manhood, when he is asked and described his path, what does he say? He says, Krishna, I give up. This path is not for me. Arjuna tells Krishna, he tells him, he says, Chanchala hi mana Krishna pramati balavad dridam tasyaham nigraham manye vayuriva suduskaram. He says, my dear Krishna, my mind is so restless, it is so turbulent, it's obstinate, that you try to control this mind by the system that you're describing is like trying to control the wind. So Arjuna, who is actually the most wonderful human being living at that time, he says this method is not for me. Because the mind is so restless and turbulent and obstinate that you try to control this mind by this method is like trying to control the wind. But even if you should strive on this path, and after many, many lifetimes of striving on this path of Ashtanga Yoga, you should finally attain Samadhi. If you should finally attain the goal of this yogic process, what does Krishna say about the yogi at the end of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita? At the end of the last verse of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, he says, Yoginam api sarvesham mad gatenantaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktatmo mata. He says that of all yogis, of all perfected yogis, that yogi who has attained bhakti, that yogi who is united with me in transcendental loving faith, that yogi is the topmost yogi of all. So once again we come to the same conclusion, that just like karma yoga is performed for the purpose of developing bhakti or love of God, just like jnana eventually leads to the conclusion that Krishna is God and you have to develop love for Him, just like in the same way you have Ashtanga Yoga, which eventually leads to the conclusion that although you become a yogi, the topmost yogi is one who has developed bhakti, one who has developed love of God. That is the final conclusion. That if you want to develop love of God, you will have to eventually transcend all these goals and eventually reach the final conclusion. Therefore, in fact, sometimes people have compared the different yoga processes. People have compared the different yogic processes to different floors in a building. If you start climbing the stairs, the first story that you climb, you struggle on the path of karma yoga. You keep on working without knowing what you are working for. So as you keep on working without knowing what you are working for, these people who are deluded on the path of karma, eventually what happens, they start thinking, what the hell am I working for anyway? So they start reading, they start acquiring knowledge. And while they keep on acquiring knowledge, their mind gets purified. And by the process of purification of that mind, finally a stage is reached whereby with that pure mind they can now meditate. And then they can embark on the process of Ashtanga Yoga. So they progress on Ashtanga Yoga with a purified mind, and through meditation eventually what do they reach? They reach the conclusion that Krishna is God and that you should develop transcendental loving faith towards Him. So finally you travel through karma, jnana, ashtanga, and finally you develop bhakti. But there is yet another way. You don't have to climb all those stairs. You can go by elevator. You can go by the lift. And what is the lift? Bhakti Yoga. You just get into the elevator and what happens? The elevator takes you straight up to bhakti. So Bhakti Yoga is the elevator that takes you straight up to bhakti. You don't have to go through all these processes one by one. There is no need for you to struggle through all these processes. You get into the lift and you're taken straight up to the top floor. Bhakti Yoga takes you all the way up to bhakti without any difficulty whatsoever. It is the simplest way to achieve bhakti. Of course, it's not a lift that can be self-operated. You have to have somebody operating the lift. That person who's operating the lift is known as Guru. So just like you have to have a liftman or an elevator serviceman who takes you up in the elevator, so also you must have a realized spiritual master who takes you in the elevator of Bhakti Yoga right up to the top until you have attained Bhakti. So what is Bhakti Yoga? What is Bhakti? Bhakti means love of God. What is the definition of Bhakti? Ananyas mamta vishnor mamta prema sangata bhakti riti uchyate bhishma prallada narada uddhava. This is the definition of bhakti. The definition of bhakti is one who has acquired unalloyed love of God. Which God? Vishnu. That means not the demigods. The demigod is not considered to be bhakti. Bhakti means love of Vishnu, of God, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ananyas mamta vishnor mamta prema sangata. Not only is that love unalloyed, but it is actually love with a sense of intimacy. Mamta prema sangata. There is intimacy with God. It's unalloyed love of God with intimacy. This is called as bhakti by Bhishma, Prahlad, Narada, Uddhava. These are all the Mahajans who have attained love of God. So this is the definition given by all of them. So when you have attained unalloyed love for that one person God, and that love for God is accompanied by a sense of intimacy, that is termed as bhakti. Now what is bhakti yoga? Bhakti yoga is the means by which you attain that intimacy. Now when one has attained bhakti, what is his characteristics? He is always talking about God, he is always thinking about God. Whatever he does for God. Everything that he is doing for God. Everything that he is thinking about God. He is actually lost in an ocean of God consciousness. He is in perpetual constant ecstasy. Occasionally this can be manifest when you see tears rolling down his eyes, you can see his hair standing on end. He is constantly in a charged state of love of God who is all around him, who is all within him. This is the state of one who has attained bhakti. So he is always visiting the temple of the Lord, he is always offering obeisances to God, he is always chanting his name, he is always glorifying him. These are the activities of one who has attained bhakti. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantasya dridvrata namasyantas tumam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Satatam kirtayanto mam, always talking about God. And in this way, always talking about God, always offering obeisances to God, always chanting His glories, he is always engaged in worshipping God. This is called bhakti. This is the activities of a person in bhakti. What is bhakti yoga? Bhakti yoga means people who have not attained bhakti. They don't know, or they are not 100% realized about God. They are not 100% convinced about God. But they follow the activities of one who has attained bhakti imitatively. Imitatively. Although they have not acquired love of God, they imitate the activities of one who has acquired love of God. And by imitating the activities of one who has acquired love of God, they actually develop that love of God. Just try to understand. When the father is shaving his beard, he takes the shaving brush, he puts on the shaving cream, and he rubs his face until he gets a nice lather. And then he takes his razor and he starts shaving. The child who is seeing the father doing that, he also wants to do the same thing. He also wants a shaving brush. He also wants a razor. So what does the father do? He takes out the razor blade of the safety razor. He gives him a safety razor without the blade. He gives him the brush and he tells him, okay, you can shave yourself. So the little boy, he lathers his face up. He takes that safety razor without the blade and he removes all the cream from his face. And he thinks that he's shaving. And eventually a time will come and this little child, he will have a beard of his own. And when he has a beard of his own, then he can put the blade in and then he will understand what it means to shave. So also, Bhakti Yoga means following your spiritual father, following a person who has attained love of God and imitating his activities according to his instructions. So a spiritual master is one who has attained love of God, and having attained love of God, he instructs you like a little child that, see, this is what I am doing, you also do that. And by imitating me, a stage will come and you will actually experience and understand what I am doing. So bhakti means having love of God. And since we do not have love of God, we imitate the activities of a person who has love of God under his instructions and under his directions. We eventually, by following his activities and imitating them perfectly, gradually we develop the same emotions, we develop the same feelings, we develop the same transcendental loving feeling towards God. That is the path of Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti is the goal, Bhakti Yoga is the means. Bhakti is the real thing, Bhakti Yoga is imitative practice, therefore it is known as Sadhana Bhakti. Sadhana Bhakti means what? Sadhana means that you are given certain rules and regulations. The spiritual master who has attained love of God tells you that now follow these rules and regulations. And by following these rules and regulations, get up in the morning at this time, chant God's name at this time, worship God in the temple in this way, perform this service to God, read these scriptures of God, read His message in the Bhagavad Gita, read about His activities in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in this way, by constantly telling you what you should be doing, you follow it. according to regulative principles. You follow it as a discipline. Sometimes people say, oh, why should I chant God's name and count it? I have passed that stage of counting God's name. If you have passed that stage of counting God's name, then you are a God-realized soul. Then in fact, we should become your disciples. But all those who have not attained love of God, who have not attained perfection, they have to follow a discipline. And that discipline must be followed under the instructions of a God-realized spiritual master. And by disciplining our mind according to his instructions, eventually we will attain the fruit which he has, that is love of God. So in short, Bhakti Yoga, the means is of discipline that must be followed. These are activities, whereas Bhakti is a state, Bhakti Yoga are activities. So Bhakti is a state where all activities come naturally with love. Bhakti Yoga are activities done under regulative principles. So in fact, there are 9 activities in Bhakti Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, there are 9 activities that we perform. And these activities were explained by none other than Prahlad Maharaj. So Prahlad Maharaj was asked by his father, why are you worshipping God? Why are you worshipping Vishnu? He is my greatest enemy. So Prahlad explains to him, my dear father, there is no enemy in the world except your own mind. There is no enemy in the whole world except your own mind. And if you have conquered your mind, you have conquered all enemies. Because when you have conquered your mind, there is no enemy in the world. You will realize perfection. So Prahlad Maharaj explains to his father. He says, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atma Nivedanam, Iti Pumsar Pita Vishnur, Bhaktischen Navalakshana, Kriyate Bhagavati Adda, Tan Manye Adhitam Uttamam. That these 9 processes are the most wonderful activities that anyone can perform. These are the topmost activities that any human being can perform because they lead to perfection. So in fact, hearing about God is termed as Shravanam. What you are hearing today, you are hearing about the glories of God. This is Shravanam. This is a process of Bhakti. This is a process of Bhakti Yoga. Kirtanam, that is also a process of Bhakti Yoga. When you chant the holy name or when I talk about God, this is also a process of Bhakti Yoga. So Shravanam is one process, Kirtanam is one process. Smaranam, that is remembering God. Thinking of God constantly is Smaranam. That is also a process. Pad Sevanam, that is worshipping at the lotus feet of God. If you can't worship at the lotus feet of God directly, worship at the lotus feet of your spiritual master. That is Pad Sevanam. Archanam, that is worshipping the Lord in his incarnation as a deity in the temple. That is termed as Archanam. That when you establish a murti and that murti you worship it as God, as an incarnation of God, then that is termed as a process of Archanam. Vandanam means reciting notable prayers to God. When you recite notable prayers to God, this is known as Vandanam. Dasyam means working as a servant of God. Sakhyam means considering yourself to be a friend of God and working in that spirit. And Atma Nivedanam means surrendering everything to God. So these are some of the processes which you should perform in Bhakti Yoga. In fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was asked that of all these 9 processes, which is the topmost process? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu answered. He said, Harer Nam, Harer Nam eva kevalam. Kalau nasti, eva nasti, eva nasti, eva gatir anyatha. He said, there is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. Except by chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name. That means of all the processes, chanting the holy name of God is the most powerful and most potent process for developing bhakti. So of all the processes in Bhakti Yoga, chanting the holy name of God is the most potent process for this age. In Kali Yuga, it is the most potent process for this age. Can you have the next slide? Of course, little later I'll show you a slideshow on the 9 processes so that you can understand them better. That's why I'm going over them a little fast. Now, among these processes, can you raise the slide a little bit? There's a 5th. Right, fine. Okay. A little lower. Now, there are 5 activities which are particularly powerful. These 5 activities are particularly powerful and potent in helping you to develop bhakti. And these 5 activities, if you acquire attachment to even one of these activities seriously, then you are well on your way to attaining bhakti. And these 5 activities should be performed under the directions of a spiritual master. First and foremost, chanting the holy name. As I pointed out again and again and again and again, there is no substitute for chanting the holy name of God. Harer Nam, Harer Nam, Harer Nam eva kevalam, Kalau nasti eva nasti eva nasti eva gatiranyatha. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way other than by chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name, chanting the holy name. Chanting the holy name is performed as a discipline to discipline your mind. You must count what you are chanting. You have to count what you are chanting because, as I said, you have no enemy in the world but your mind. Your own mind is your enemy. Your mind will convince you that you are most elevated, that you don't need to count. Your mind will convince you that you are chanting all day, therefore you are chanting more than Haridas Thakur, who chanted 300,000 names of God every day. But when you start counting, you will realize that you are hardly chanting one round. There was one person who was attending a course. He said, I don't need to chant God's name. I'm chanting all the time. I said, just for my sake, take this counter home, borrow it. Take it and tell me tomorrow how much you chanted. He said, I chanted 104 times. And I thought I was chanting all the time. So he did not even finish one mala, but he thought he was chanting all the time. That is how the mind deceives you. Therefore, it is very important to understand that your mind is your greatest enemy, and to discipline that mind, you must count what you are chanting. You must discipline your mind to chant a certain minimum every day. So chanting is very important. Worshipping the deity of the Lord. It is by worship of the deity of the Lord that you can make great progress. Actually, the deity of the Lord is not an idol. Actually, I have a separate lecture on deity worship, which is not included in this course, but perhaps we'll cover it one of these Thursdays. So the incarnation of God in the form of Murti is termed as a deity. And by worshipping that Murti of the Lord, we are able to fix our minds in the form of God. And by fixing our minds in the form of God and performing seva to that Murti, by performing service to that Murti, we actually progress towards developing love of God. This is the second most important process. You have study of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is necessary to read the Srimad Bhagavatam if you want to acquire bhakti, because the Srimad Bhagavatam has been designed for the specific purpose of creating bhakti in your heart. It has been said in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself that Nashta Prayeshva Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatya Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. That by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam every day and by serving the pure devotee of God, love of God is established in your heart as an irrevocable fact. So reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam actually helps to develop love in your heart. And this process must be performed every day. Daily you must study the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the instruction of authorities on Bhakti Yoga. In fact, it has been said that a home where Srimad Bhagavatam is, that is considered to be a place of pilgrimage. And a home, no matter how pious and holy and no matter how saintly its occupants, if Srimad Bhagavatam is not found there, you can understand that there is something lacking in that house. That means bhakti is lacking in that house. Because it is by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, by hearing about the pastimes, the glories of God and His incarnations, that actually we develop love of God. Then we have living in a holy dham. Of course, if you live in a holy dham, nothing like it. Because if you've tried living in Ayodhya, or you've tried living in Chitrakoot, or you've tried living in Vrindavan, or you've tried living in Mayapur, or you've tried living in Nathdwara, or any of these dhams, you will understand what I mean. Because when you are living in a holy dham, you cannot help but be reminded of God. When people meet you on the road, they'll say Jai Shri Krishna. Or in Vrindavan, they'll say Jai Ram. Or if you go to Ayodhya, they will chant Ram's name. So in this way, whoever meets you will be chanting God's name. You're always reminded of God. There's a temple of God at practically every doorstep. In Vrindavan, which is such a small place, there are 5,000 temples of God. Vrindavan, which is such a small place, there are 5,000 temples of Krishna. Because practically every little household is made into a temple. If you walk on the streets, you will find that people who are driving sheep, they have got a tilak on their forehead. Their one hand is carrying beads in a bead bag and the other hand is carrying a stick to drive the cattle before them. So they drive the cattle with one stick, in one hand they keep beads, and on their forehead there is the mark of Vishnu. So everybody is steeped in God consciousness in a dham. So when everybody is steeped in God consciousness in a dham, it is not natural that you cannot help but remember God. Just like if you go to a city where everybody is caught up with the rat race, like Bombay city, it's very easy to forget God. But if you go to a holy dham, it's very easy to remember God, because wherever you turn, you see God. Wherever you speak to somebody, you are reminded about God. So living in a holy dham is a very important process. Now, of course, you might say that I can't go to a holy dham. Alright, you can't go to a holy dham, neither can I. But what we can do is we can make our home into a holy dham. Make your home into a dham. You worship the deity of the Lord. You read the Srimad Bhagavatam, you chant the name of God, not only you, but your wife, your children, or your husband, your children. You offer the food that you eat to God. You have pictures of God around you. You have books of God around you. You have tapestries with the glories of God on all of them. So wherever you go, wherever you look, you can't help remembering God. That is what your home should be like. So whenever you go home, wherever you turn, you will see God. You get up in the morning, you will see a painting of God. Wherever you go, you should be reminded of God. That is the nature of the dham. And you can replicate that dham in your own home. In fact, it has been said by Veer Raghav Acharya, one of the great spiritual masters in our disciplic succession, that visiting places of pilgrimage is a bewilderment of the mind. Because actually you should try to see God wherever you are. What is the use of running away to see God somewhere? You should learn to see God wherever you are. So even in your own home, you should be able to replicate a dham. You should be able to make your home into a dham itself. In fact, not only should you be able to make your home a dham, but wherever you step, that place should become a dham. In the Mahabharata, it has been stated, Yudhishthira is speaking to Vidura. And what does he speak to Vidura? He tells him, Bhavad Vidha Bhagavatas, Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Prabho, Tirthi Kurvanti Tirthani, Swa Antastena Gadabrita. He says, my dear Vidur, what is the need for you to visit places of pilgrimage? You yourself are such a great devotee of the Lord that wherever you plant your feet, that place becomes a place of pilgrimage. Because since you carry God in your heart and you are so transparent that people who look at you can see directly through you and can be reminded of God. Therefore, you yourself are the creator of places of pilgrimage. That is the nature of a pure devotee. A pure devotee becomes the creator of places of pilgrimage. He doesn't need to go to places of pilgrimage. That is what you should aspire for. One who is not ambitious, he aspires to go to a dham all the time. But one who is ambitious spiritually, you must be ambitious spiritually. If you want to achieve love of God, you require to be ambitious spiritually. And be ambitious spiritually and create a dham wherever you go. So that when people see you, they must remember God. That is the nature of the devotee. He needs to purify himself to that extent that wherever he steps, that becomes a dham. My spiritual master, Kirtananand Swami Bhaktipad, he was told that you create a place of pilgrimage in America. Because America has no place of pilgrimage where people will remember God when they go there. You create that place of pilgrimage. But creating that place of pilgrimage doesn't mean materially creating a place of pilgrimage. It doesn't mean materially building temples or materially building buildings or constructing deities. Creating a place of pilgrimage means purifying yourself to that extent that everywhere around you people cannot help remembering God. So today if you go to New Vrindavan is a place which is a dham created by Srila Bhaktipad. That because of his purity, because of his spiritual potency, a place of pilgrimage has developed around him. That is what you should aspire for. In your own homes, you make your own home a place of pilgrimage. So when your friends, when your relatives, when your neighbors, they come into the house, they cannot help remembering God. So your home itself must become a holy dham. That is what you should be doing. And that will help you develop love of God. Then you have another very, very important principle. Associating with devotees of the Lord. There is no substitute for this whatsoever. There is absolutely no substitute for associating with devotees of the Lord. Because your mind is like a chameleon. I must have shown you this in a slideshow earlier. What is a chameleon? The chameleon is a lizard that changes its color according to its surroundings. Therefore, if it's placed on a red surface, it will take on a red color. If it's placed on a black surface, it will take on a black color. If you put it on a white background, it will become white in color. It will blend with the surroundings. That is the nature of your mind. Your mind, which is your worst enemy, is also a chameleon. It takes on the color of the surroundings. And if you keep the company of people who are on the path to hell, you will accompany them. There is no doubt about that. I have seen so many times, anybody who's been to college will have seen this, that you go to a college hostel, you find boys coming from mofussil areas and small towns. They're very clean and pure at heart. They've never seen the big city. But when they come to the big city, in a short time, what happens? They take to consumption of alcohol, cigarettes, prostitution, gambling. All these activities they start, simply by associating with other people who are performing the same activities. Because when you're associating with people who are performing those activities, they will force you to perform them just to give them company. Arey chal yaar, ek sip to lena. Have one sip. I know you don't drink, but have a sip, just taste it. Or when they're smoking a cigarette, have one puff. Just have one puff, see how good it feels. Have one sip, you'll know how wonderful alcohol is. Take a bite. I know you're a vegetarian, but just try this mutton samosa, how wonderful it tastes. So in this way, they're always convincing you to become like them. And the mind quickly follows suit. The mind, which is like a chameleon, it quickly takes on the color of the surroundings. So you are known by the company you keep. And according to that company, you will be dragged to hell. But if you keep the company of people on the right path, if you keep satsang, it works in reverse direction. Just like your friends who take alcohol will say, come on, have a sip, don't be a spoil sport. A devotee will say, come on, chant one more round of God's name. One more round of God's name you should chant. Don't tell me you're still taking eggs, you should stop doing that immediately. So this is the nature of satsang. On one hand, you have friends who drag you on the opposite path. On the other hand, people on the opposite path will encourage you to become like them. That is in human nature. This is the nature of the mind. And by keeping association of people on the right path, you will also come onto the right path. You don't have to make much effort. You just keep their association. Just by simply keeping their association, you will see great changes in your life. This is the simplest way. You lie back and keep the association of people on the right path. Before you know what's happening, your life will have changed for the better. It has been said in the Mohamudgara Stotra that satsangatve nissangatvam, nissangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nischalitatvam, nischalitatve jivan mukti. Bhaja govindam, govindam bhaja mudamate. That satsangatve nissangatvam. By keeping the association of people on the right path, you will lose the association of people on the wrong path. Actually, I'm sure there must be some of you who have been attending the last 5 or 6 days, must have had to cancel some cocktail parties, some card sessions. Somebody must have had to do that if they wanted to come here. Because when you keep the company or you keep the association of people on the right path, without making a separate endeavor, you automatically lose the association of people on the wrong path. Because you can't do them both. Time is short. Therefore, you have to allocate your resources. Either you go for association with people on the right path or the association of people on the wrong path. And you pick right people, then very shortly you will lose the association of people on the wrong path. Satsangatve nissangatvam. And nissangatve nirmohatvam. When you lose the association of people on the wrong path, what happens? You will lose your delusion. Because if you keep the association of people who are on the wrong path, you will have all the wrong values in life. You will think that the goal of life is to acquire more and more and more. You will think that the goal in life is to enjoy more and more and more. You will think that the goal in life is to control more and more and more. You will think that the goal in life is to be better and better than everybody else. And you will become further and further and further in illusion. But if you keep the association of people on the right path, very soon you will lose the delusion. You will understand this world is a dukh alayam ashashvatam. You will understand this world is a place of misery where everything is temporary. That is anityam asukham lokam. That janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha dosha anudarshanam. That is actually in life you have birth, old age, disease, death, fault, misfortune and happiness. And the best way to be prepared for them is to be on the path of devotion, to be equipped to face the miseries of life. By enjoying yourself with the wrong people, you will eventually cause yourself suffering. But by associating with the right people, you will learn how to enjoy. Instead of learning to dance in a discotheque, you will learn to dance before the deity of God. Instead of singing film songs, you will learn how to do kirtan. Instead of reading cheap paperback thrillers, you will learn how to read Srimad Bhagavatam. Instead of eating meat, you will learn to taste wonderful prasad that has been offered to God. Instead of being intoxicated by alcohol, you will learn the supreme intoxication of chanting the holy name of God. So in this way you will learn how to enjoy life. Everybody wants to enjoy life, but nobody knows how to enjoy life. So our purpose is to show you how to enjoy life. Because if you know how to enjoy life, you will actually fulfill your purpose of life by attaining bhakti. You will be happy in this life and you will be happy in the next life. Our life is not dull, I assure you. Our life is rich, it's full of color, it's full of music, it's full of dance, it's full of literature, but of the right sort. So by keeping the association of people on the right path, you lose the association of people on the wrong path. You lose the association of people on the wrong path, you lose your delusion. And along with losing your delusion, what happens? Simultaneously, you become fixed in consciousness. Your consciousness becomes fixed on God. This is what we call, actually when I was in school, we had a different motto. When I was in college, our college had a different motto. When I was in medical college, our college had one more motto. For example, when I was in school, I was in Campion school, the motto of our school badge was Gaudium in Veritate. That is the Latin motto which means joy in truth. That was the motto of our school, joy in truth. Then I went to Jai Hind College. And in Jai Hind College the motto was I will and I can. That was the motto. Then I went to Grand Medical College. In Grand Medical College the motto on our college badge was Mens sana in corpore sano. A sound mind in a sound body. If I am asked to make a badge for our movement, and I am asked to put a motto for that badge, I will put this motto. Purification through enjoyment. Purification through enjoyment. That means we are teaching you how to enjoy, but through the process of enjoyment you are getting purified. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Projata Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnana Chayad Ahitukam. That when you actually worship God scientifically, what happens? When you worship God scientifically, without making a separate extraneous endeavor, automatically you acquire knowledge and detachment. So you just enjoy, you sing, you dance, you eat prasad, you associate with wonderful devotees. And through the process of enjoyment, you will become purified and fixed in consciousness. And when you become fixed in consciousness, what will happen? Then you will become Jivan Mukt. You will become liberated in this lifetime. In this lifetime itself, you will become immune to the miseries of the world. Dukheshu anudvignamana sukheshu vigataspriha vita raga bhaya krodha stitadi muni uchyate. You will not be shaken in the midst of unhappiness. You will not be excited in the moments of greatest happiness. You will be free of attachment, fear and anger. You will be a sage of steady wisdom. Na rishyati, na dveshati, na sochati, na kankshati. Shubha ashubha parityagi yo mad bhakta same priya. That you will neither excessively love someone, neither you will excessively hate someone. You will never have hankering for something or lamentation. You will not consider something auspicious or inauspicious because you will see everything coming from God. You will actually become a genuine devotee of God. This is the wonderful effect of satsang. So satsang is the most important. This course will get over tomorrow. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the course. It's the beginning of the rest of your life. It's the beginning of your devotional life. And if you want to be serious on the path of devotional life, you must keep the association of people on the right path. You must keep satsang. Because if you don't keep satsang, whatever benefit you gain today, it will be lost, because very soon you will be overcome by the material world. Actually, Maya has two strengths. It is known as Avarnatmika Shakti and Prakshepatmika Shakti. Just like a swimmer, somebody catches his leg and pulls him down, and the ocean covers him from the top. That is how Maya works. It will pull you under and it will cover you up and you will forget everything. Therefore, it's important to not only chant God's name, but also associate with devotees. You might have heard of these nickel-cadmium batteries which have to be charged again and again. So what happens? You can use those batteries, but finally when they get discharged, you have to charge them up. And after that charge, you can use them again. So you can chant God's name, but if you don't keep the association of devotees, your battery, your spiritual batteries will become discharged. You will have to charge up your spiritual batteries again. That means you will need to keep association of people on the right path. You will need satsang to charge your spiritual batteries. Otherwise you cannot continue the spiritual path without charging those spiritual batteries. So satsang is perhaps one of the most important principles. Now you might ask me, that what are the stages in Bhakti Yoga? That what are the different stages that one has to go through? So these are some of the stages. That's why you're here today. If you didn't have a little bit of faith, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair. That you have a little bit of faith, that maybe there is something to it. What's the harm in hearing it? After all, I don't have to agree with him, I don't have to follow what he's saying, but at least let me hear what he's saying. That is called, you have that little bit of faith that somebody is acting in good faith, somebody is acting in best interest. Somebody is wanting to do something good for you. So you come with a little bit of faith. So it's called Adau Shraddha. So you require a little bit of faith to get the start. Then you have Adau Shraddha Tatha Sadhu Sang. It's not sufficient to have that faith. You must also have the association of devotees, Sadhu Sang, Satsang you must have. You must keep the association of saintly people. You must keep the association of sadhaks or people on the spiritual path. So Adau Shraddha, first little bit of faith. Then you must keep the association of sadhus and keep the association of sadhaks. And eventually you come to bhajan kriya. That means with that faith and with the association of devotees, eventually you become convinced of the process. And by becoming convinced of the process, you begin devotional life. The beginning devotional life means you take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master by initiation. And by accepting a spiritual master, you engage in devotional activities under his guidance. That is known as bhajan kriya. Can you have the next slide? Then you have anartha nivritti. Anartha nivritti means, what is artha? Artha means that which is valuable to you. Anartha means that which is not valuable to you. So you start losing all that is not required for you. For example, you may have been fond of reading cheap thrillers, or you may be fond of watching soap operas on the television, or videos or whatever, or Hindi films or Chaya Geet, or the Sunday film. Perhaps tomorrow they are showing you 3-4 Sunday films, so that you can watch the election results. But very soon, if you are on this path, you will lose the attraction for those things. Anartha nivritti. Why is it called anartha? It is called anartha because those things are not valuable to you. They do not help you to develop love of God. So all that is not helpful towards developing love of God is termed anartha. So that which is not necessary in your profession, that which is not necessary for you to develop love of God, that is anartha, and that anartha will fall by the wayside. All the cricket matches that you are glued to on TV, all those hours you spent in watching Wimbledon, they will now have no meaning for you. Now you will not be interested. You will not know whether India is playing Pakistan or West Indies. You won't know who is the captain of the Indian team. Because these are considered to be anarthas, they will drop away from you. They will have no real meaning or no substance in your life. Therefore they will all drop away. This is called anartha nivritti. All that is unessential in your life, because these things are not essential in your life. They are not essential either for your work, neither they are essential for your developing the goal of life, that is love of God. So these things which are unessential will gradually start falling off. Just like ripe fruits fall off a tree. It's not a painful process where you have to keep on tugging and pulling them off. No. Naturally, automatically, just like a snake casts off its skin. Just like a snake, it casts off its old skin, so also you will cast off your old skin. You will lose that skin which was addicted to so many things. which were absolutely unnecessary for your life. You will discard them without a second thought. After anartha nivritti, then you become nishta. Nishta means what? That of course, you stop doing all these things, but the taste still remains. That means you are not watching the cricket match on television, but if you are passing by, "Arey, score kya hai?" You are not watching the television match, but still somewhere in the back of your mind, you are still thinking about it. Therefore, you want to know what's the score. You want to know who's won. You want to know what's the movie that's being shown on Sunday, even though you're not going to watch it, because somewhere in the back of the mind, that taste remains. So you've received anartha nivritti, you've lost the taste for those things, but somewhere, somehow in the back of your mind, that faint attachment still remains. When you become nishta, that also goes away. Then you don't even think about these things. You're not bothered about these things. You can look back with detachment and just wonder how you did all those crazy things. You can look back with great amazement at what a different kind of person you were 6 months ago or 3 months ago, and now what a different person you become. This is when you become nishta. Then you get ruchi. That means you actually acquire a taste for God. You acquire a taste for katha. You acquire a taste for hearing the glories of God as related by God-realized saints. You acquire a taste for going to the temple of God. Formerly you were going to the temple of God, how? Out of compulsion, because it's your sadhana. Because your spiritual master told you, you must visit the temple so many days of the week, you were forcibly going there. You were offering obeisances to the deity as a sadhana, out of discipline. But now you naturally acquire a taste for all these things. You enjoy it. You are beginning to relish your devotional attachment to God. This is called ruchi. Then you have one more stage is not mentioned here, that's asaktas. That is, you become more and more steady because you are more and more detached from the world, the more and more attached you are to God. And finally you reach the stage of bhav, the 8th stage which is called bhav. And when you achieve bhav, you can't think of anything but God. You can't sit one moment without serving God. You are constantly engaged in serving God at all times. Not an instant you can rest without serving God. Sleep actually becomes very painful to you because it's an interruption between serving God. And even in that sleep you dream about God. This is called bhav. And prem is that final stage when you have acquired union with God. When you see perfection all around you, you see God all around you, and you have achieved actual transcendental bliss. Then you will have tears rolling down your eyes, your hair will stand on end. Your body will shudder with ecstasy when you look around you and you see God everywhere. That stage of complete, absolute, undiluted bliss, that is known as prem. So these are some of the stages in the course of attainment of bhakti. Then we have the next slide. Now it's very important to understand that bhakti is a state of consciousness. That bhakti is a state of mind. And it's not a dress. Bhakti is not a dress. Bhakti is not a hairstyle. Bhakti is not a way of behaving. Bhakti is what is going on in your mind. This is what is bhakti. I remember, I think it was the previous course, one bearded man with a big mark on his forehead and wearing a dhoti stood up and he asked me, he says, "Are you practicing everything that you are preaching?" Because he thought that if you wear a jacket and you wear a tie and you wear a shirt, then how can this guy be performing bhakti? Bhakti means that you have to wear clothes like I do, you have to shave my head like I have shaved. Then only you can perform bhakti. But bhakti is not a hairstyle, bhakti is not a dress, bhakti is a state of mind. Actually, when my spiritual master Kirtananand Swami Bhaktipad initiated somebody outside the temple, it was a bold step because until then initiation was given only to people in the temple. Only those who had shaved their heads and moved into the temple, they were given initiation. So when he gave initiation to a devotee who was living outside the temple and working in his business, this devotee, he asked him, he says, "Bhaktipad, what shall I do now? Shall I shave my head? Shall I wear dhoti? What shall I do? If you want, I'll shave my head, no problem. I don't mind. I've got my own business. Nobody's going to tell me anything if I shave my head." So Bhaktipad told him, he said that bhakti does not mean changing your hairstyle. Bhakti means changing your heart. So we don't want you to change your hairstyle, we want you to change your heart. We don't want you to change your dress, we want you to change your state of consciousness. This is what is most important. It has been said in the Vedic scriptures that iha yasya harer dasya karmana manasa gira nikhilasva api avasthasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. That externally the person may be working in the world, he may be living a life like everybody else, and people looking at him from outside may think, oh, this guy is just like one of us. But they don't realize that because his consciousness is consciousness that is God consciousness, that is constantly conscious of God in every activity that he is doing, that although he is living in the world like you and me, he is absolutely liberated from material consciousness. He is actually liberated in this lifetime. In this life itself he is liberated. Jivan mukta sauchyate, in this life he is liberated. In fact, it has been said, again in the Mahamudgara Stotra, that Jatilo mundi lunchita kesha kashaya ambara bahukrita vesha pashyanapi na pashyati mudo udhara nimittam bahukrita vesha bhaja govindam govindam bhaja mudamate. Jatilo mundi, Jatilo means what? Matted locks. You know, these yogis and holy men, they never wash their hair or comb their hair, so they get matted locks. So Jatilo mundi lunchita kesha, you have monks who pluck their hair out or shave their head, lunchita kesha, completely bald. Kashaya ambara, they wear orange ochre robes. Bahukrita vesha, this is the dress that they are wearing. But pashyana pina pashyati mudo. But although they are seeing, they are not seeing spiritual, they are not seeing consciousness, they are not seeing God. Udara nimittam bahukrita vesha, they are doing it simply for the sake of their belly and their genitals. To satisfy their tongue, their belly and their genitals, they have put on these clothes. So he says, don't do that, don't just shave your head or have matted locks and wear orange robes for the sake of maintaining your body or for your tongue, your belly and your genitals. Instead he says, worship Govind, worship Govind, worship Govind, you fool. That it's by the worship of the Lord, not by changing your dress or hairstyle, that you actually achieve the goal of life. In fact, there's a famous story about two monks, and these two monks had taken a Maunrat. Maunrat means they have taken a vow not to speak. So when they had taken a vow not to speak, these two sannyasis, they were walking down by the riverside. And while they were crossing the river, while they were wading through the river, there was a beautiful young lady standing on one of the banks. So one of the sannyasis, he picked up this beautiful young lady, he carried her across the river and he put her down. And these two sannyasis walked off again. So the other sannyasi was aghast. Actually, it has been mentioned that a sannyasi, what to speak of carrying or touching a beautiful woman, he should not even let his foot touch a carved wooden doll in the shape of a woman. This is the instruction. That his foot should not even touch a carved wooden doll in the shape of a woman. What to speak of touching or carrying a woman. So the other sannyasi, his companion, was completely aghast. But he couldn't speak a word because they had a Maunrat. So 5 days they walked side by side. And 5 days later, he could not bear it anymore. So he turned to his companion and said, my dear friend, you are a sannyasi, you should be ashamed of yourself. Why on earth did you carry that beautiful woman across the river? So his friend looked at him and said, my dear friend, I carried that beautiful woman across the river for 5 minutes, but you've been carrying her in your mind for 5 days. So bhakti is a state of consciousness. It's very important that you understand that. It's not your external activities that are important, but it is the consciousness in your mind that's important. What is your state of mind? What is your state of consciousness? In fact, there's another very famous story that there was one priest who was living in a Vishnu temple. He was a head pujari, and every day he would do 6 artiks a day in front of the deity. And he would ring the bell, and he would loudly sing and loudly do kirtan. And across the road, just bang across the road from the Vishnu temple, there was a brothel. And in this brothel, there was a young prostitute who had been forcibly confined there. And so naturally, as prostitute in a brothel, she had to entertain the customers who were brought to her. And there was an earthquake. And when the earthquake took place, the priest also died and the prostitute also died. So when they both died, the Yamadoots came and started dragging the priest towards hell. The priest was stunned. He said, "Wait a minute, you got the wrong number. You got the wrong address. It's across the road, across the road. I am the priest in the temple, the prostitute is across the road." So the Yamadut said, "No, we haven't got the wrong address, with the right address." So once again the priest said, "No, I am sure you've got the wrong address. I thought the Indian postal service was bad, but this Yamadut beat everything. You better understand that you have to go across the road. The brothel is across the road. That prostitute has to be taken to hell, not me." So the Yamaduts did not listen to him and dragged him to hell. So there he asked Yamaraj that, "How could you do such a thing? I am a priest, I am a Brahmin. I have been performing 6 aartis a day to the Lord. I have been loudly chanting God's name and loudly doing kirtan and ringing the bells. And you are dragging me to hell?" So Yamaraj looked at him and said, "There is no mistake whatsoever. Absolutely no mistake. Because although this prostitute across the road was entertaining customers all the time, she was doing it out of complete helplessness. She could not avoid it. And all the time her ears were tuned to the kirtan coming from the temple. Her ears were tuned to the bells ringing in the temple. Her mind was constantly thinking about the deity in the temple. Her mind was constantly in the temple thinking of God. And you rascal, you were living in the temple, you were loudly singing the glories of the Lord, you were loudly doing kirtan, you were loudly ringing the bells, and you were flamboyantly doing artis, but all the time your mind was in the brothel. You were wondering, who was this customer? How must he be entertained? Who is the prostitute who is entertaining him? All the time your mind was in the brothel. So you lived in the temple, but your mind was in the brothel. She lived in the brothel, but her mind was in the temple. Therefore you go to hell and she goes back to Godhead. So bhakti is a state of consciousness. It's not a dress or a hairstyle. It's what your thoughts are. If you are constantly thinking of God, then you can continue doing your job. You can continue working in everyday life. I don't mean that you should work in a brothel. She was doing it out of helplessness. That doesn't mean that you can work as a bartender or a butcher. There are some occupations that you cannot pursue. But she was doing that, she was performing that job out of sheer helplessness because she was forced to do it. You have a choice. If you have a job which is not beneficial towards God consciousness, you can always change it. So you can work in a bona fide profession and you can actually serve God simultaneously by thinking of God all the time. And you will get the full benefits of bhakti. Whereas even if you shave your head and live in a temple, if your mind is somewhere else, then you will not get the same benefits that you would. This is another very, very, very important principle. That means bhakti means surrender. That means you should learn to surrender to God. You should understand that everything that happens in the world has not happened by accident. Nothing in the world that has happened by accident. Everything in the world that happens by the will of God. It has been said, not a blade of grass moves without God's consent. So not a blade of grass can move without God's consent. So if a blade of grass cannot move without God's consent, can you imagine that everything in your life must have happened actually as a blessing, as the mercy of God? This is a very, very important principle. Therefore, you must learn to understand and accept the will of God. When you learn to submit to the will of God, then only will you realize what is bhakti. After all, holiness is not measured in knowledge and erudition. Holiness does not mean knowing the scripture by heart. Holiness does not mean the ability to quote from scripture or having a great academic knowledge of all the scriptures. Holiness is not knowledge and erudition. Holiness is seen by a lifetime of submission to the will of God. When you learn to submit to the will of God, that is holiness. It doesn't matter if you don't know a single verse from Bhagavad Gita. It doesn't matter if you don't know a single line from any scripture that you cannot quote, or you cannot give lectures, or that you cannot impress people with your knowledge. But if you can simply surrender to the will of God, if you can lead a life of submission to the will of God, that is holiness. To understand that every blade of grass cannot move without God's consent, that is holiness. Seeing God in all things, that is holiness. Seeing perfection in creation, that is holiness. Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Shishyate. That God is perfect and complete, and everything that comes from God must necessarily be perfect and complete. And only when you realize that, you will understand what bhakti is all about. So you might say, oh, submit to the will of God. If I submit to everything that's done to me, then how can I go on living in this world? I had better shave my head and walk out of here. I have to submit to everything that's going on in the world. But you should understand when to submit and when not to submit. In fact, it has been said that how do we pray to God? We pray to God in this way, that, oh God, give me the strength to change the things that I can change. Oh God, give me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. God, give me the strength to change the things that I can change. God, give me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. And oh God, give me the wisdom to know the difference. This is the most important. Not only should God give you the strength to change the things that you can change, not only should you ask God to give you the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, but you should constantly pray to God to give you the wisdom to know the difference. Because it is foolishness to struggle against the will of God when it would be wiser to surrender to the will of God. And it is foolishness to surrender to the will of God when God has given you the strength to change what can be changed. But although we struggle all our lives to change things, it is more difficult to learn to surrender. In fact, there are some famous stories given in the scripture. For example, once Vishnu was sitting next to his consort Lakshmi Devi in Vaikuntha, and suddenly he jumped up and started moving forwards. But hardly had Vishnu taken 3-4 steps forwards, when suddenly he turned around and came and sat down. So Lakshmi asked him, that why did you get up, run forward, and after taking 3 steps again come back and sit down? So Vishnu explained to her, there was a devotee of mine, who was chanting my names incessantly and constantly. And while he was chanting my names constantly, what happened? 30 people came forward with iron rods to beat him. Just imagine, one single man chanting God's names, and 30 people with iron rods came to beat him. So naturally, when I saw his helpless condition, I rushed forward to help him. But this guy, he forgot about me and decided to tackle the problem all by himself. So I came back and sat down. So when occasion demands that you can't do anything, you have to surrender to God. Because if you don't surrender to God and you try to handle yourself, He leaves you to handle it by yourself. So time comes when you know that it cannot be handled by you, then you should learn to surrender to God and let God handle the problem. God, this problem is too big for me. I can't do it. I've thought about it. I weighed all the consequences beyond my power. Now you have to do something. That means surrendering to God. But if you try to tackle it yourself, you not only disturb your mind, but then God leaves you to solve the problem all by yourself. This is a famous story is given about Draupadi. So Draupadi, when her clothes are being stripped by Dushasan, the Vastra Haran, you might have seen that in Mahabharata. So Dushasan is said to have the strength of 10,000 elephants. So where is Draupadi's strength compared to that? And when he catches hold of her dress or her sari to pull it off, she requests her 5 wonderful husbands to save her. Normally, wife looks to the husband to save her, but this lady, she had 5 wonderful husbands. So they should teach you not to depend on your husband to save you. Better you depend on God. So if Pandavas cannot save their wife, where will your husband save you? You should learn that your husband cannot save you, it's only God who can save you. So she turns to 5 wonderful husbands to save her, and not one of those 5 can do anything. So finally she turns to Bhishma Dev. She turns to the great sages in the assembly. She turns to Dhritarashtra, and she asks everybody there, please help me from being disrobed in public. But not a soul lifts a finger. Not a soul lifts a finger. So finally what does she do? She catches the sari in her teeth. In the teeth she holds the sari, and she holds on to her sari with one hand. And with the sari held in her teeth and the sari held in one hand, she raises the other hand to God and she prays to Krishna. And, oh Krishna, you must help me. But Krishna doesn't help her either. Krishna does not help her either. She's holding on to the sari in her teeth. She's holding the sari with one hand, and with one hand she's raising above her head and asking Krishna, please help me. He does not help her. Then when Dushashan starts to jerk the sari, it is jerked out of her teeth and it is jerked out of her hand. And she realizes that my teeth can't hold the sari, neither my one hand can hold the sari. So why am I wasting my time even trying? Then she raises both her hands. And after raising both her hands, she calls out to Lord Krishna. Raising both her hands and depending fully on Krishna, then she calls out to Krishna. And what does she say? She says, Shanka Chakra Gada Padma Dwarkya Nila Achyuta Govinda Pundarikaksham Rakshamami Sharanagata. That, oh Lord, Vishnu carries Shank, Chakra, Gada and Padma, lotus. Dwarkya Nila Achyuta, oh infallible ruler of Dwarka. Govinda, protector of the cows, protector of saintly people. Pundarikaksham Rakshamami Sharanagata. So I am taking full shelter of you. I am surrendering to you 100%. Now you must protect me. So when she surrenders to him 100%, then Krishna helps her. So this is a very, very important lesson. That if you surrender to Krishna 1%, he will protect you 1%. If you surrender to Krishna 2%, he will protect you 2%. If you surrender to Krishna 3%, he will protect you. If you surrender to Krishna 50%, he will help you 50%. But if you surrender to Krishna 100% only, then he can help you 100%. This is what is said in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sathaiva bhajami aham. Mam vartmanu vartante manushya patha sarvasha. He says that to the extent that you surrender to me, to that extent I reward you. If you surrender 10% to me, I reward you 10%. You surrender 100% to me, I reward you 100%. So bhakti means surrender. That means you should learn to surrender to God. And when you learn to surrender to God, then only God will actually help you 100%. In fact, it has been said there are 6 symptoms of surrender. And what are these 6 symptoms of surrender? These 6 symptoms of surrender are Anukulasya sankalpo pratikulasya varjanam. First of all, it means giving up everything that is not beneficial to developing love of God. Everything in your life that is not beneficial to developing love of God, give it up. And everything that is beneficial to developing love of God, take it up. This is the first 2 symptoms of surrender. People say, I am surrendered, I am surrendered, I am surrendered. But what is the meaning of surrender? Anukulasya sankalpo pratikulasya varjanam. That whatever is not helpful to developing love of God, discard it. And everything that is helpful to developing love of God, take it up. So discard it means what? Discard it means there will be a lot of pain when you are discarding that which is not helpful to you in God consciousness. There are so many friends that you will have to give up. So many things that you will have to give up which are not helpful to God consciousness. Actually, everybody who becomes a serious devotee, he loses many things, because unless you lose something, you cannot gain something more. It's unless you lose bad association, you cannot get good association. So friends who will not understand you, friends who will not cooperate with you, you will have to give them up in course of time, because they will be struggling to prevent you from coming on the path of God realization. They will call you a spoil sport, they'll call you a nut. They'll say, why have you given up meat? Why have you given up alcohol? Why have you given up this? Why have you given up that? Behave naturally. They may even tell you, these Hare Krishnas, they brainwash you. Yes, it's a fact. Yes, it's a fact. I am brainwashing you. What do you mean by brainwashing? That means our brain has so many things that need to be washed out. Actually, the world is full of dirt, and that dirt sticks to our mind, and therefore our mind needs to be washed and scrubbed. Cheto darpana marjanam bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam. That by chanting the holy name of God, all that is dirty in your heart is removed. The dust on the heart of your mirror is clean. Your brain is getting washed. Every time you chant God's name, your brain is getting washed. That is the purpose of chanting God's name, to brainwash you. So people will actually struggle to prevent you from coming on the path. Why will they struggle to prevent you? Because God is actually testing your sincerity. I showed you in the slides on the second day that when the gopis come to meet Lord Krishna in the night, Krishna tries to discourage them. He gives them 100 important reasons why they should go back home. He tells them that society does not behave like this, they cannot accept your behavior, you cannot do like this, you should not do like this. He gives them a big lecture on morality. And then the gopis say, please take your lecture on morality and stuff it. We have come here to associate with you. We can do without all these lectures. So when he is convinced of their sincerity, then only he associates with them. So also God will discourage you in many ways. He will discourage you in many forms. He will discourage you through many people. And that will be the test of your surrender. Whether you are willing to give up everything that is an obstacle to your realizing God, and whether you are willing to take up everything that is beneficial to your realizing God. It's also been said that Rakshishyatiti Vishwaso Bhoktritva Varnam Tatha. You have to understand that God is protecting you. Not only should you be willing to give up all that is not beneficial to God consciousness, not only should you be willing to take up everything that is helpful in God consciousness, but also you should understand that God is your protector. Not only that God is your protector, but that you cannot depend on anybody except on God. In the world, we depend on 100 people. Wife depends on husband, husband depends on wife, husband depends on friend or business associate. So we are always depending on somebody or the other. We must learn to depend only on God and understand that God is the only one who is protecting us. Draupadi learned it the hard way. You learn it the easy way. Learn by hearing. That you cannot depend on anybody except on God. Because God is the only one who protects you. Because so many people will try to put so many obstacles in your path. I remember that one friend of mine, or shall I say ex-friend, atheistically inclined, he tried everything possible to discourage me. He argued and argued, but of course I argued back. Then he discovered he couldn't defeat me in argument, so finally he lost his temper. So he said, you have gone mad, you have gone bonkers, and I don't know what to do with you. He said, I had great respect for you. You have always been a brilliant student. You've been excellent at academics. You had a very good career. And I have always thought of you as an excellent surgeon. And everybody I knew who needed some treatment surgically, I always recommend that please go to him, because he is very good at his job. But now after seeing what you've done to yourself, I am going to tell everybody I meet, don't go to him even by accident. That this guy has gone mad, don't go to this surgeon even by accident. So I said, fine, if that's what you wish. I said, understand that patients don't come to a doctor because you send them to him. Patients come to a doctor because God sends them to him. A doctor is never dependent for his practice on other people to send patients as referrals. He is dependent only on God to send patients to him. Of course, if he acts through you, wonderful. But if you don't want him to act through you, he will act through somebody else, don't worry. The next day, his brother-in-law came to me. So when his brother-in-law came to me, I said, I'm surprised that you should come here. So he said that, yes, you know, my friend, that's your friend, I went to him with such and such problem, and he said I needed a surgeon's opinion. And so I said, let's go to your friend, nice chap who's just next door. And he told me, don't go to him. So I said, why? Why shouldn't I go to him? He's been such a good friend of yours. He said, don't go to him because now he's gone mad. We said, how is he gone mad? He's saying all the time, this crazy guy is chanting God's name. All the time this chap, crazy guy, is chanting God's name. Therefore, I won't advise you to let him touch you with a barge pole. Forget about a surgical knife. So don't go anywhere near him at all. He's absolutely mad. So I said, I see. Is that what he told you? Then how come you've come here? So he said, I just thought about it. I just thought about it and said that if this person is chanting God's name all the time, then he is the one person I can be 100% sure will not do an unnecessary operation on me. That's why I came to you. Of course, incidentally, he didn't need an operation, but that's beside the point. So he felt that if this guy is chanting God's name all the time, he must be the one surgeon in Bombay I can really trust, that he won't do an unnecessary operation on me. That's why I can go to him safely. So exactly what I was telling him, I said, even if you don't want to send somebody to me, if God wants to send him to me, he will send him to me. And this was seen the very next day in his own brother-in-law. So this is what you should try to understand, that God is your protector and nobody else is your protector except God. We always depend on different people. We think this one will help me or that one will help me or XYZ will help me. I must depend on so and so. But no, depend only on God. God may act through hundreds of people. God may act through hundreds of people. But there will be also so many people who will not let God act through them. But doesn't matter, don't worry. Because God actually says, He says, Kauteya pratijanahi name bhaktya pranashyati. He says, O son of Kunti, you declare it boldly, my devotee will never perish. This is the statement of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, declare it boldly, he is telling Arjuna, that my devotee, he will never perish, because I shall personally look after him. He also says, Ananyas chintayanto mam ye jana paryupasate tesham nityabhiktanam yoga kshemi vahami aham. He says, so one who worships me with unalloyed devotion, I preserve what he has and I provide what he lacks. This is the promise of God in the Bhagavad Gita, that if you become an unalloyed devotee of God, of Krishna, He will preserve what you have and He will provide what you lack, both materially and spiritually. He will do what is best for you. He will always do what is best for you. So never depend on anybody else. Don't depend on your husband or your business partner or your dealers or your distributors or whoever it is. Depend on God, because God will eventually help you when all the chips are down. Can you have the next line? Of course, I forgot to mention two other symptoms of surrender. The first two symptoms of surrender are giving up everything that is useful to God and giving up everything that is against development of God consciousness, everything that will prevent you from becoming God conscious, and taking up everything that will help you in God consciousness. The second is learning to depend on God and learning not to depend on anybody else except on God. It's also been said that you should also learn to be completely surrendered to God. That means you should understand that God does everything, and also understand that you do nothing. This is also a very important principle. That you should learn that whatever happens in the world by your efforts is not happening by your efforts, it's happening by the will of God. That nothing happens in the world that you perform, everything is done by God. That you do nothing and God does everything. When you do this, you will gradually acquire humility. You will understand that all success in life comes from God. All failures in life also come from God. They are also for your education. Failures are for your education, success is for your education. And both these things come from God. That you yourself, you are simply an observer. You are simply a passenger in a taxi. And God is the driver of that taxi. And God is taking you everywhere, sightseeing. Your whole life is a tour around the city. And God is pointing out, this is this, this is that, this is that. He's taking you on a guided tour around the city. And you are sitting in the back of the cab. And you are accepting whatever the taxi driver is telling you because you have trust that he is the genuine guide. But if you start arguing with the taxi driver, if you tell him, no, 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 go this way, go that way, you try to take over the steering wheel, you will end up with an accident. Don't try to do that. Don't try to take over what God is doing. God is doing everything perfectly. You can't take anything away from Him. He will do exactly what He wants. And you will not be able to budge Him one instant. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, He says, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday deshe arjuna tishtati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantrarudhani mayaya. He says, I am seated in the hearts of all living entities and I am directing the wanderings of everybody who are all seated in a machine made of material energy. So you are an inhabitant in this body. And this body is the vehicle. It's a machine made of material energy. And who is guiding the wanderings of this body? God. So this is the taxi. Your body is the taxi. And God is the taxi driver. You are just the passenger in the taxi. You have to do nothing except surrender to God and surrender to wherever God is taking you. So never imagine that you are doing something. Again I bring that example of that slide of the kangaroo with the baby kangaroo in the pouch. The baby kangaroo thinks he's doing everything. He's jumping so high, he's running so fast. But it's the mother who's doing that. He's just in the pouch. So also you are like that in the body. You are in the pouch of God. And God is taking you everywhere. And you are under the illusion that you are doing everything. If you simply understand that God does everything and you do nothing, that will be a great step towards surrender. So surrender consists of 6 things. One is giving up everything that's an obstacle in God consciousness. It doesn't matter what and who that is. Taking up everything that is beneficial to God consciousness. Depending on God as your only protector and learning not to depend on anybody else. Understanding that God does everything and understanding that you do nothing. These are the 6 symptoms of surrender. Can you have the next? Last slide. One very important principle is that there is no loss and only gain in the process. There is no loss, there is only gain in the process. That on the path of bhakti, you can never ever lose. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Neha bikramo nashosti pratyavayana vidyate swalpam api asya dharmasya trayata mahato bhayat. That on this path there is no loss, there is no diminution. And even a little bit of advancement can save you from the greatest fear. Because if you have 100 crore rupees in your bank account, when you die, you will have nothing in your next life. You start from scratch. But if you acquire 5% God consciousness, if you acquire 5% consciousness of Krishna, then in the next life you will start with 6%. You can start from 6%. You don't lose anything. Whatever you put in your bank account of devotional service, that's a permanent account. It's a permanent account. It's permanently against your credit. And even a little thing that you do will be of great benefit to you. As I said, Bhagavad Gita kinchita dita ganga jal lava kanika pita sakridapi murari samarcha kriyate tasya yamena na charcha bhaja govindam govindam bhaja mudamate. That if you have read or if you heard Bhagavad Gita a little bit, if you have drunk a drop of Ganges water, if you have surrendered to Krishna even once in your life, then at the time of death you have no argument with Yamaraj. You are saved from the agony of going to hell. Therefore he says, worship Govind, worship Govind, worship Govind, you fool. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is asked by Arjuna. Arjuna asked Krishna, suppose I take to this path. Oh Krishna, suppose I take to this path. But after taking to this path, midway I lose enthusiasm and I fall away. Then I will have lost out so much enjoyment materially. At the same time, I will be nowhere spiritually. So I will lose both ways. So I will perish like a riven cloud. Sometimes you see two clouds, a little piece of a cloud, it leaves one cloud to join the other. And what happens? Before it can join the cloud, the other cloud floats away. So what happens? That cloud is completely lost. Of course, this you see more nowadays in the elections. That you see so many dissidents, Ayarams and Gayarams. They leave one party to join the other party. And the other party says, yes, yes, join us. But once they leave the first party, they have no position in the second party. So like a riven cloud, they perish between two parties. So that is Arjuna's fear. He says, I am thinking of giving up this path of material enjoyment to take to the spiritual path. But if I leave this and lose enthusiasm, then I will fall away from there and I will perish in between two of the paths. I will neither be here nor there. So what does Krishna tell Arjuna? Krishna tells Arjuna, don't worry. If you take to the path of God consciousness, then you need not fear. Because even if you take to the path and fall away, what will happen? He says, Suchinam Shrimatam Gehe Yoga Brashta Vijayate. That if you take to this path and you should fall away, first of all, you will go to the heavenly planets. And after you have exhausted your desires for sense gratification in the heavenly planets, then you will come back to earth, and where will you be reborn? Suchinam Shrimatam Gehe. You will be born in a family which is both pure and pious. You will be born in a family which is wealthy and aristocratic. Therefore, you won't have to worry about your daily bread and butter and be caught in the struggle for survival. And simultaneously, that family will be pure at heart. They will be well established on the path of devotional service, so that you will have wealth and aristocracy, and simultaneously you will have religion and purity and piety. This is the kind of birth that you will get. And in fact, you will take up the path of devotional life exactly where you left it off, and you will continue to progress on that path. So nothing is lost. You will neither lose materially nor will you lose spiritually. In fact, he says, you will go to the heavenly planets where you will exhaust. Of course, as I told you, if you take to devotional path even little bit, you are spared from hell. So hell is out of the way. So not only will you be spared from hell, but you will be guaranteed heavenly planets where you will exhaust your propensities for material enjoyment. And then you will be born in a family which is aristocratic, rich and pure and pious. And then you will continue to make progress on that path in that family. So this is the nature of the person who has left material life to take to spiritual life. Even after a short progress on that path, if he falls away, this is his fate. And he says, of course, of one who has advanced a great deal on that path and then falls away, then he will be born into a family of transcendentalists. He will be born into a family where both the mother and father are realized souls who are great in wisdom. But of course, such a birth is very rare. Because realized souls, they rarely have occasion to produce a child. And especially at that stage, a child who is born to them must be really a very pious and saintly person. So transcendentalist who has progressed a lot on that path, he is born to parents, both mother and father, who are transcendentalists, who are greatly realized in wisdom. Such a birth is very rare. But at least, even if you fall away after a short advancement, you can be assured that you will be born in an aristocratic, rich, as well as a pious family, where you can continue to make progress exactly where you left off. So if you made 10% progress, you started 11%. So there is absolutely no loss in the process. There is only gain in the process. You never lose anyway. You are spared hell. You are guaranteed heaven. You are promised an aristocratic, rich birth and a pious birth as well. So from there you can continue your path. So in this way, Krishna encouraged Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita that do progress, take up this path, because on this path there is no loss at all. And I will preserve whatever you have, I will provide whatever you lack, I will see that you never perish on this path. So now I'll just show you a small slideshow on the 9 processes of devotional service so you can understand this 9 processes of devotional service a little better. Known as Shravanam. And I'm going to show you about a person in the Srimad Bhagavatam who has actually attained perfection by the process of Shravanam. That is, simply by hearing he has acquired perfection. So this is the story of Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj was the grandson of Arjuna, and he was to be the next king to rule after the Pandavas. So when Parikshit Maharaj was in the womb, Ashwatthama releases a Brahmastra, a nuclear weapon which is designed specially aimed at the womb to destroy the fetus. And Lord Krishna personally incarnates in the womb of his mother, Uttara, so that Parikshit Maharaj will be saved from the Brahmastra. As a result of this pious birth, Yudhishthir is so overwhelmed with joy that there is great celebration, wonderful ceremonies are performed, and hundreds and thousands of cows are given in charity to pious and saintly people. And Parikshit Maharaj, he becomes a great devotee of God right from a young age. He is constantly worshipping God and he is constantly thinking about God, and he actually becomes a great devotee of God. However, one day when he goes to the forest and he is very hot and tired and thirsty, he enters the hut of a rishi and asks for some water. But this rishi, who is absolutely wrapped in meditation on God, he does not see him, neither does he actually become aware of his presence. So Parikshit Maharaj is very upset. He says, I am the king of the land, and here this person cannot even offer me a glass of water. So to show his anger, he takes a dead snake and drapes it around the neck of this Muni, and he goes away. So when the son of the Muni comes to know, when he comes back, he finds out by his mystic powers that his father has been humiliated by Parikshit Maharaj. He curses Parikshit Maharaj that he shall die within 7 days after being bitten by a snake. So what do you think Parikshit Maharaj does? What would you do? If you were told that you are guaranteed to be dead in 7 days' time, how would you spend these 7 days? Just think about it. But Parikshit Maharaj did something very unusual. He abandoned his wife, his children, his family, he abandoned his kingdom, and he went to the banks of the holy river, and there in the association of sages, he asked Sukadev Goswami, the son of Vedvyas, about what is the purpose of life and what should a man who is about to die do. This is the question that he asked Sukadev Goswami. That what should a man who is about to die do? What are the duties of a man who is about to die? And Sukadev Goswami in turn relates to him over 7 days and 7 nights the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So he relates to him over 7 days and 7 nights the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And here Parikshit Maharaj, he sits without eating, without drinking, without sleeping, without evacuating his bowels, and for 7 days and 7 nights he hears the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the origin of the Bhagavat Sapta as it is conducted today. So by hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, by Shravanam, over a 7-day period, he achieves perfection. And in the end, at the end of 7 days, when the snake comes and bites him, he takes it absolutely unmoved. And then leaving this body happily, he progresses back to Godhead. This is an example of Parikshit Maharaj, who has attained perfection of life, that is bhakti, simply by process of Shravanam, simply by the process of hearing. So also, we find that Suta Goswami, who heard it from Sukadev Goswami, recited it before the sages of Naimisaranya. And that is where the Srimad Bhagavatam was put down. Here we see Rishabdev, the father of King Bharat, relating this message to his children. So also it is the duty of every father, it is the duty of every mother to make their children aware about God. To make them aware that their duty is to become devotees of God and escape from the cycle of birth and death. Otherwise you should not call yourself father and mother. So also it's the duty of the child to instruct his parents if his parents are not aware about the process of devotional service. Here we find Kapila Dev, who is relating the message of devotional service to Devahuti, his mother. He is also an incarnation of God, and he is relating the message of devotional service to his mother Devahuti. But you must hear it from the right source. Just like Ved Vyas heard it from Narad Muni, and Narad Muni in turn heard it from Brahma, and Brahma in turn, he received this knowledge from God directly. This is a Hayagriva incarnation of God, giving the Vedic scriptures to Brahma. So all messages of God come from God himself. And from God it comes down through a successive chain of God-realized spiritual masters until it approaches you. That is the only way you can get genuine knowledge. So here we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, an incarnation of God, who comes to show these Vedantic scholars, these followers of Vedanta, these monks and Prakashan and Saraswati, that the goal of life is love of God, and it cannot be obtained through dry knowledge, but it can be obtained only through love and surrender to the Supreme Lord. So also we have so many programs in our temple. This is part of our self-development workshop which we have for college students. And college students are also taught the same principles that we have taught you in this course. And also we teach them how to chant the names of God, because it is very, very difficult to get young people to accept God today. It is in fact, Krishna says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. Out of many thousands of people, one seeks perfection. And even out of those, one of those thousands, even one of those people of those thousands who seeks perfection, hardly one will know God in truth. And in Kali Yuga, very few people are interested in hearing about God. But we are interested in teaching everybody, particularly the younger generation, because they are going to be the citizens of tomorrow. And this is one of the self-development workshops where these people are also performing the process of devotional service known as Shravanam. They are hearing. But of course, as I said, the best way is Kirtanam. Harer Nam, Harer Nam, Harer Nam eva kevalam, Kalaunasti eva nasti eva nasti eva gatiranyatha. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to inaugurate the process of Sankirtan, the congregational chanting of the names of God. A Krishna Varnam Tvisha Krishnam Sangopangasa Parshadam Yagna Sankirtana Prayer Yajanti Sumedasa. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will incarnate, Krishna will incarnate in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Kali Yuga, and he will inaugurate the process of congregational chanting, and those who are wise will worship this incarnation by this method in this age. So in fact, chant, chant and chant. It has been said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Iti Shodashakam Nam Nam, Kali Kalmashu Nashanam, Nata Parataropaya Sarva Vedeshu Drishyate. It has been said that in these 16 words, the entire Vedic scriptures have been condensed. All the scriptures of the world are in these 16 words. And by chanting these 16 words, you can actually attain the goal of life, that is love of God. So you can chant congregationally here on the street as a Sankirtan, or you can chant silently on your beads or on your counter. Speaking about God is also Kirtanam. Here is a picture of Srila Prabhupada, who is actually dictating his books. He has written more than 70 volumes on God consciousness. The Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita, other volumes on Bhakti. More than 70 volumes he has dictated in this dictaphone, and all by the process of Kirtanam. So also, it has been said that just like we have Parikshit Maharaj who became perfect by hearing, we have Sukadev Goswami who became perfect by speaking. So that is the beauty of God consciousness, that the speaker purifies himself by speaking and the listener purifies himself by hearing. So one who hears is purified, one who speaks is purified. Actually, nobody preaches. Usually most of us do not preach. We speak for our own purification. And actually the speaker also gets the same spiritual benefit that the person who is listening does get. Here also we get the example of Narad Muni. Narad Muni actually used his power of speech for the wrong purpose. Here he is seen as a pop figure. He becomes a cult figure, being very handsome and attractive and a good singer. He sings nonsensical songs, nothing to do with God, and is surrounded by beautiful women. During a program that has been performed for the sake of glorifying God. Therefore, Narad Muni is cursed to become the son of a lowly menial on earth. So he leaves the heavenly kingdom and becomes the son of a lowly menial on earth. And it is only after purification through satsang and through devotional service that he becomes Narad Muni in the next life. Now we have the process of smaranam, that is hearing. And this is the story of Hiranyakashipu, who performed so many austerities so that he could get the boons of immortality from Brahma. And Brahma came and saw him with his body half eaten by ants. He gave him back his body, but told him, I cannot give you immortality. But he asked for special boons, that he should not be killed by animal or by human being, either in the day or the night, or in the sky or on the ground. And using these powers, he terrorizes the universe. So when the demigods, they come to destroy his kingdom in his absence, they try to take his wife away, but Narad Muni stops them and says, no, in this his wife's womb is a great devotee of God by the name of Prahlad. And Narad Muni, he takes her and gives her shelter in his ashram. And in his ashram, he relates to her the glories of God. And Prahlad Maharaj, who is in the womb at that time, he hears the glories of God in devotional service in his womb. And even as a young child, Prahlad Maharaj relates the glories of God to his classmates. He says, Kaumara acharet pragno dharmam bhagavatam iha durlabam manusham janma tadapi adhruvam arthadam. He says that you should begin the process of devotional service from the age of 5. Because when you're young, you spend your time playing. When you're youthful, you spend your time running after the opposite sex. When you become old, your body is too old and disabled to be able to remember God. So better you start the process of devotional service from the age of 5. His father is angry with him and pushes him off the lap because he insists on worshipping God. His father wants that his son should worship him, that he wants to be God. This is the nature of the demon. The demon wants to think that he is God, whereas the devotee wants to worship God, who is the supreme person. So he tortures his son. He has him tortured by tridents, by snakes. He gives him poison. He has him thrown from a rooftop, from a cliff. He has him burnt, thrown in the fire. But Krishna actually rescues him all the time. And finally, the Lord appears in the form of Narsingadev, and he rips apart the entrails of Hiranyakashipu. He destroys all his soldiers, and sitting on the throne, he awards the position of king to his devotee Prahlad Maharaj. So, Prahlad Maharaj, what do you think he says? He says, the first boon I want is that my father should be delivered. That is the nature of the devotee. He doesn't hold anything against anybody. So, Prahlad Maharaj attained perfection through the process of smaranam, that is remembering God. In fact, people often ask that why is it that God allowed Prahlad Maharaj to be tortured like this? He allowed Prahlad Maharaj to be tortured in so many ways before he finally appeared. Why is it that Prahlad Maharaj was tortured in so many ways before he finally appeared? But you have to understand that Prahlad Maharaj was tortured but did not suffer, because he was doing smaranam. Because Prahlad Maharaj was constantly thinking of God all the time, the miseries of the world did not affect him. Therefore, he was untouched. So also, like Prahlad Maharaj, you will be untouched by the miseries of the world. They will not affect you at all if your mind is completely fixed on God. These are the deities at New Vrindavan of Narsingadev and Prahlad Maharaj in my Guru's Dham at New Vrindavan. So this brings us to the next process, that is the process of Archanam. That by serving the Archa Vigraha, by serving the deity of the Lord, you can actually attain perfection. And by bathing the deity, dressing the deity, doing arti to the deity, and by serving the deity you can attain perfection. And in fact, this process is available for those who are very young. Even a child can be taught this process. And the best example of a child who performed this process is Dhruv Maharaj. Dhruv Maharaj was thrown off his father's lap, Uttamapada, by his stepmother, Suruchi, saying that you shall never become king, but my son shall become king. So what does Dhruv Maharaj do? He runs to his mother, Suniti. And Suniti, his mother, advises him that you go to the forest and worship the Lord because only He can help you. So on the way he meets Narad Muni, and Narad Muni tells him that why are you aspiring for material things? Better you go back and tolerate everything. He says, you can save your lectures for somebody else. Just tell me whether Krishna can fulfill my material desires. So Narad Muni gives him instruction to worship the deity of the Lord fashioned out of mud by the river's bank, and to chant God's name, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and also to perform austerity. So by performing austerity, chanting God's name, and specifically by worshipping the deity of the Lord, Dhruv Maharaj attains perfection. Actually, the Lord appears before him. And then when the Lord says, I'll give you the kingdom that you desired, he says that yes, I worshipped you for the kingdom, but now I don't want it. I had a material desire when I worshipped you, but now that I have seen you, I don't have any material desire. So although the Lord fulfills material desire, He also takes away that material desire. And Prahlad Maharaj is blessed by the Lord. And eventually, he rules over the kingdom much greater than Brahma, and eventually returns home to Godhead. So if you can't worship the deity in your home, you should go to the temple where it is worshipped. If you can't worship the deity in the temple, it is instructed that you can even worship the deity in your mind. Here is the example of the Brahman of Pratishthanapur, who worshipped the deity in his mind throughout his life because he could not worship the deity because of his lack of material possessions. So one day, after a whole lifetime of worshipping the deity in his mind, where in his mind he was bathing the deity, he was feeding the deity, in his old age he was worshipping the deity in his mind, and he was offering hot sweet rice. So in imagination he tried to see whether the sweet rice was hot or not by touching the utensil, and he found it was too hot. Suddenly he came out of his reverie and he found that on his finger there was an actual blister. That was the power of his meditation. And the Lord, being so pleased with his deity worship that was occurring in his mind, he came down and took this Brahman back home, back to Godhead. The process is very powerful even if performed mentally. Now we have Vandanam. And the example of one who performed Vandanam or great prayers to the Lord is here we have Gajendra. Gajendra was in great distress. He was being dragged by the crocodile into the river, into the lake. And when he was about to be defeated, he lifted a lotus flower to the Lord and he prayed to Him with all sincerity. And by these prayers, the Lord appeared and He killed the crocodile and He saved the elephant Gajendra and gave them back their spiritual forms. And giving them back their spiritual forms, He delivered them back home, back to Godhead. So in fact, you can also offer prayers to God. But you should offer prayers to God where? These prayers are to be offered in front of the deity. Just like when you post your letter, you must post it in a post box. If you don't post your letters in a post box, they may or may not reach their destination. So also, if you want to actually post your prayers must be posted before the incarnation of God, before the incarnation of the deity of God. So actually there is a picture of the Sri Sri Radha Vrindavan Chandra at New Vrindavan. Here is a lady who is offering her prayers in front of them. You can come to our temple at Chowpatty, and here we have Radha, Sri Sri Radha and Sri Sri Radha Gopinath here, and you can offer your prayers to them. And of course the true test is whether your prayers are answered or not. So unless you try, you'll never know. So come and try and see the power of the incarnation of God in the deity. That if you sincerely pray to God, God always answers your prayers. So you can also offer your prayers in repentance. Like you see here, Manigriva and Nala Kuvera, they are the sons of Kuber, and being overcome by alcohol and intoxication, they are having enjoyment with beautiful women in the river. When Narad Muni comes, the women cover themselves, but they stand up naked. So Narad Muni curses them to become a tree. And eventually it is Krishna who uproots these trees and delivers these two souls. And here they are offering prayers in thanksgiving and in repentance to him. Here's another example of repentance. Here Indra is offering prayers to Lord Krishna because he has caused a Samvartak cloud to inundate Vrindavan. And Krishna has lifted Govardhan to protect Vrindavan. So he comes and asks forgiveness from Krishna. Here's an example of Akrura who obtained perfection by worshipping God through praying to him. And Akrura was such a great devotee of the Lord that when he saw the footprints of God in Vrindavan, he simply rolled in the dust. That was the greatness of Akrura. And by chanting the glories of God, by praying to him with great devotion, Akrura obtained perfection. This is an example of Pad Sevanam. This is an example of Lakshmi Devi who is serving the lotus feet of Vishnu. So Pad Sevanam means serving at the lotus feet of Krishna. But if Krishna is not directly available to us, we can always serve at the lotus feet of our spiritual master. Here is the example of two boys who are actually serving the lotus feet of my spiritual master, Srila Kirtananand Swami Bhaktipad, in our temple at Chowpatty. Incidentally, for your information, Srila Bhaktipad will be coming to Bombay on 17th of December. So here we have Dasyam. We have these two devotees of God who are Jai and Vijay, and they are acting as gatekeepers of Vaikuntha. So this is working as a servant. And the best example is Hanuman. Hanuman has obtained perfection by working as a servant of God. He is the best servant of God and we should learn to emulate him. And you can serve God in a humble way. It doesn't matter how great you are. Here is the example of the sovereign who served the king. So this is the king of Jagannath Puri. And he sweeps the street in front of Lord Jagannath before the Jagannath Rath Yatra takes place, to show that even the king can work in this mood which is known as Dasyam, as a servant of God. So you don't have to be too young or too old. Here you see the children working as servants of God in New Vrindavan. And older people. And what are they doing? They are building they have built in fact this palace of understanding. They are building this cathedral of understanding and the city of God. Then you can have Sakhyam, that is becoming an associate or friend of God. And Arjuna is the best example of how to be a friend of God. And if you can't become a friend of God, you can become a friend of the devotees of God. And the devotees of God, they are found all over the world. Here they are seen in Canada. And they may be either dressed in orange robes like you see here, like the sannyasis, or they may be like you and me in ordinary clothes. These are all devotees of God, but they are dressed in ordinary clothes and they are leading an ordinary life, just like you and me. And you can meet these people at the temple, at Chowpatty, at Sri Sri Radha Gopinath Mandir. And by associating with them, you can learn what it is to be a friend of God. And you can join us for our programs, which are there on every Thursday, where I conduct lectures, or on every Sunday, where we have a Sunday feast. And in this way, you can learn what it is to become a friend of God, through friends of God. Now we come to Atma Nivedanam, and here is the example of Bali Maharaj. That when Bali Maharaj conquered the universe, the Lord incarnated in the form of Vaman Dev, the dwarf incarnation. And in the dwarf incarnation, he asked Bali Maharaj for a gift of 3 paces of land. So Bali Maharaj agreed. Although his advisor Shukracharya told him that don't agree, because he is God and he will take away everything that you possess. This is exactly what he did. With his first footstep, he covered the lower planets and earth. With the second footsteps, he covered the heavenly planets. And then he told Bali Maharaj that now there is no place for me to keep my third step. So you promised me 3 steps of land, 3 paces of land, now you cannot fulfill this promise. So he has him bound by the snake ropes of Vasuki and sends him to Sutal, a hellish planet. But Bali Maharaj says that there is one place you can keep your foot, you can keep it on my head. And Bali Maharaj offers his head to Vaman Dev. And in this way, he does what is known as Atma Nivedanam. He gives up everything. In actual fact, this is to illustrate that we can give up all our material possessions, but still we cannot please God. Just like Bali Maharaj, he gave up all the 3 worlds, but he did not please God. What did God want? God wanted him to surrender his mind. So one who has surrendered all his possessions but not surrendered his mind, he has surrendered nothing. But one who has surrendered his mind, he has surrendered everything. So Bali Maharaj, by surrendering not only everything but also his mind, he has become one of the Mahajans. He has become one of the examples that we should follow. And here we see examples. For examples, these are the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sanatan Goswami and Rupa Goswami, they are ministers to the Muslim ruler. But they give up their position of power and they give up their wealth to live as humble, renounced monks in Vrindavan. And so also the other 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. They give up everything and surrender their minds and heart and soul and bodies and material possessions to simply glorify God and set an example to the rest of society. And these are great examples in the past, like Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada. Now Bhakti is a process that is independent of your faith. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Sikh, or whether you're a Jew. Bhakti transcends all barriers, because Bhakti is a relationship between man and God. There is only one religion, and that religion is love of God. And if you understand that there is only one religion and love of God, then there will actually be peace and happiness in the world. That there are different paths which lead to the same goal, that is love of God. It has been said in the Rig Veda that Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, that there is only one truth, there is only one God, but the learned know Him by different names. Therefore, there is no difference between following the path of Christ and following the path of Krishna. For those who are interested in this kind of literature, we have a book called Christ and Krishna written by my spiritual master. And in fact, we will be having an interfaith conference in Bombay when my spiritual master comes down. So Bhakti transcends all barriers. It's a relationship between Jivatma or the spirit soul and Paramatma or the super soul, between man and God. It is to help you to develop love of God. And it doesn't matter whether you are worshipping God as Allah or as Christ or as Jehovah or what have you, provided it's a bona fide name and a bona fide religion. Of course, if you worship God in His form, then you will find the path more simple. This is what is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. That one who worships me in my form, he will find the path much more simple and he will make progress more rapidly. But you are fully entitled to worship God according to your faith, because every religious path is bona fide. All you have to do is to follow the 4 regulative principles. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, and chant the name of God with love and with devotion. If you follow this process, it doesn't matter what faith you are following, you will surely develop bhakti. But you must have a spiritual master. That is, you must have an example of your scripture. You should have a living scripture in front of you. You should have a person who is living his life in full harmony with the scripture. Only then can you follow the scripture of your choice. Therefore, actually, my spiritual master, who was actually a Baptist by birth, he followed the process of the Bhagavad Gita because he met A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, who was an embodiment of the Bhagavad Gita, who lived his life in full harmony with those books. So it doesn't matter what faith you follow, but whatever faith you have, you must have a spiritual master who is God realized and who must be an incarnation of that scripture you want to follow. And in fact, bhakti is a scientific process. Why do I say it's scientific? Because if you follow this process strictly, you will find that you will get reproducible results. And people all over the world, whether they are of African descent or Arab or Jew or Indian or Eskimo, whether they are blonde or black haired, regardless of their social, economic, cultural, religious, ethnic background, they've all obtained the same benefit by following the principles of the Bhagavad Gita. They've obtained the same benefit by worshipping Lord Krishna. A man must elevate himself by his mind. He should not degrade himself, because the mind is a friend as well as the enemy of the conditioned soul. Because if your mind is unbridled, your self-realization will be impossible. But he who disciplines his mind and who strives by right means will be assured of success. Because your mind is like a chameleon. This is a lizard, the chameleon. When situated on a dark colored bush, it acquires a dark color. But this same chameleon with a white flower will also acquire a white color. So also your mind is like the chameleon. You keep the association of the wrong people, your mind will acquire their color. But if you have satsang, the association of people on the right path, you will also have the same color of your mind. You will also purify your mind. You will also develop love of God. And you must learn this very important principle, that dva suparna sayuja sakhaya samanam vriksha parisha swajati tayor anya pipulam swadvatya anashnan tayor abhichikasati. That in your heart there are two birds. One bird is eating the fruits of the tree. Some are bitter, some are sweet, some are tasteless. So also you are trying to enjoy the fruits in the world. And until you turn your face and look at God who is seated in your heart, only then will you find peace. You should learn to withdraw within, not seek sense pleasure without, but seek happiness and solace within. Just like the tortoise, it has been said that just like the tortoise withdraws his limbs from all sides, so also a wise man withdraws his senses from all sides. And such a person is a sage of steady wisdom. So when you withdraw your senses from all sides, when you withdraw from sense gratification, material sense gratification, and you turn inwards into thoughts of God, then actually you will be undisturbed by the miseries of the world and you will acquire perfection and love of God. So you as an example of Kurma Avatar, where actually the manthan takes place. It has been said that in Satyug, the demon and the devotee, they are situated in different worlds. In Treta Yuga, like Ram and Ravan, they are situated in the same world but in different countries. In Dwapar Yuga, Krishna and Kamsa are situated in the same country. But